Chapter 1. The Revelation. The summer rain drummed against the tall windows of Longbottom Manor as Augusta Longbottom sat in her favourite armchair, watching her grandson Neville sort through his school trunk with unusual enthusiasm. The boy had returned from his first year at Hogwarts just 3 days ago, and the transformation in him was remarkable. Gone was the timid, accident-prone child who had left 11 months earlier. In his place sat a young man with straighter shoulders and brighter eyes, eager to share every detail of his magical education. And then, Gran, Professor McGonagall actually smiled when I got the transfiguration right on the 3rd try, Neville was saying, carefully arranging his school books on the sitting-room table. Harry said she never smiles in class, but I think she was just pleased that someone finally managed to turn a match into a needle without setting anything on fire. Augusta's weathered hands paused in their knitting as she noticed the way Neville's voice warmed when he mentioned his friend. Harry Potter, the boy who lived. She had heard the name spoken in hushed, reverent tones throughout the wizarding world for over a decade, but hearing Neville speak of him as simply Harry reminded her that beneath all the legend was just another 11-year-old boy. "This Harry seems to have been quite the friend to you," Augusta observed, her sharp eyes studying her grandson's face. "You've mentioned him in nearly every story you've told." Neville's cheeks coloured slightly, but he nodded with conviction. "He's brilliant, Gran. Really brilliant. And kind. When Malfoy was being awful about my Remembrall, Harry stood up for me, even though he barely knew me then. And when I was too scared to stand up to him myself, Harry made sure I knew it wasn't because I was weak." Augusta's knitting needles clicked steadily as she processed this information. Frank had spoken of James Potter in much the same way during their aura training, as someone who stood up for others without thought of the consequences. The apple, it seemed, had not fallen far from the tree. "And where does young Mr. Potter spend his summers?" she asked, keeping her tone casual. "I imagine his family must be quite proud of his achievements." Something flickered across Neville's face, a shadow that made Augusta's maternal instincts sharpen like a blade. Her grandson looked down at his hands, at fidgeting with the edge of a herbology textbook. "Well, he doesn't really like talking about his family," Neville said carefully. "He lives with his aunt and uncle. Muggles. They don't really understand magic." The way Neville's voice trailed off sent warning bells through Augusta's mind. She had raised this boy since he was barely more than a baby, and she knew every one of his tells, the way his shoulders hunched slightly, the careful selection of his words. Neville was protecting someone. "I see," she said mildly, setting down her knitting. "And how does Harry feel about returning to them for the summer?" This time, the shadow that crossed Neville's face was unmistakable. He glanced up at his grandmother, then away again, clearly struggling with something. He tried to make it sound like it wasn't so bad," Neville said quietly. "But Gran, he looked so scared on the train. When we were getting ready to leave, I mean. Ron, that's Ron Weasley, another friend. Ron asked if Harry wanted to come stay at the Burrow for a few days, and Harry got this look on his face like Ron had offered him the world. But then he said his relatives would be expecting him." Augusta's knitting fell forgotten into her lap. "Scared?" she repeated, her voice carefully controlled. "In what way scared, Neville?" "Like—" Neville struggled for the words, his young face troubled. "Like how I used to look when I thought I was about to disappoint you, only worse. Like he was walking toward something awful and couldn't stop it." The sick feeling that had been building in Augusta's stomach intensified, and she had seen that look too many times during the war, on the faces of people who knew they were going home to darkness. "Did Harry ever speak of his life with these relatives?" she asked, leaning forward slightly in her chair. Neville shifted uncomfortably. "Sometimes. Little things. He mentioned once that his bedroom was very small. Said it used to be a cupboard, actually. But he laughed when he said it like it was a joke. and he's always hungry at meals, even after he's eaten loads. Hermione, that's Hermione Granger. She's the cleverest witch in our year. She said it's like he's not sure when his next meal is coming. Augusta's hands had gone cold. A cupboard. Sweet Merlin. They kept the boy in a cupboard. Anything else? She managed to ask, though her voice sounded strange, even to her own ears. Well, Neville hesitated, then seemed to decide that his grandmother deserved the full truth. He's really thin, Gran. I mean, really thin. Thinner than Ron's brothers, and they're all growing too fast to keep weight on. And sometimes when someone would move suddenly or raise their voice, Harry would flinch, just for a second. But I noticed. And once, when we were talking about relatives, Dean said something about his stepfather teaching him to play football, and Harry got this funny look and said he couldn't imagine any relative of his teaching him anything useful. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity, and Augusta felt something fierce and protective roar to life in her chest. This was not neglect. This was not merely the misunderstanding of muggles faced with a magical child. This was abuse. Gran? Neville's voice was small and uncertain. Is something wrong? You look... Augusta realized she must look terrible, because she felt as though the world had tilted on its axis. The boy who lived, the child who had saved them all from you-know-who had somehow survived the killing curse, was going home to people who kept him in a cupboard and starved him. I need a moment to think, she said carefully, picking up her knitting again with hands that weren't quite steady. Why don't you go put your things away properly? We'll have dinner soon. Neville looked as though he wanted to ask more questions, but something in his grandmother's tone told him this wasn't the time. He gathered his books and headed for the door, pausing at the threshold. Gran, Harry really is a good friend, the best I've ever had. I wanted you to know that. After Neville left the room, Augusta sat in the gathering dusk, her knitting forgotten once again. The rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, but she barely heard it. All she could hear was an echo from 20 years ago, her own voice, promising Frank and Alice that she would always protect Neville if anything happened to them. She had failed to protect her son and daughter-in-law from the Death Eaters. She had been too late to save them from Bellatrix Lestrange's cruel torture, too powerless to prevent their minds from being shattered beyond repair. Frank and Alice now lived in permanent residence at St. Mungo's, unable to recognize her or their son, lost in a world of madness and pain. But this was different. This was a child, alive and whole, but suffering in ways that made Augusta's blood boil with righteous fury. Harry Potter had already saved the wizarding world once. He had already paid a price no child should have to pay. And now, it seemed, he was paying another. Augusta rose from her chair and walked to the window, staring out into the rain-soaked grounds of her estate. In her mind, she could see Frank as a child, running through these same gardens, full of life and laughter. She could see Alice, young and radiant, holding baby Neville for the first time. She could see all the family dinners, all the birthday celebrations, all the moments of love and safety that every child deserved. Harry Potter was growing up without any of that. He was living in a cupboard, going hungry, flinching away from raised voices. The child who had somehow defeated the most dangerous dark wizard in a century was being treated worse than a house elf. Not anymore. And Augusta had once been one of the most formidable witches of her generation. She had lost that reputation somewhat after Frank and Alice's fate broke her heart, but the steel beneath had never truly softened. If anything, it had been tempered by loss, made stronger by the knowledge of how much could be taken away in a single, terrible moment. She would not stand by and watch another child suffer when she had the power to stop it. Augusta walked to the ornate writing desk in the corner of the sitting room and pulled out a piece of parchment. There were people she needed to contact, laws she needed to research, precedents she needed to examine. The boy who lived deserved better than a cupboard and empty plates and the constant fear that Neville had described. He deserved a family. He deserved safety. He deserved love. And Augusta Longbottom, who had failed to save her son from the darkness, would move heaven and earth to save Harry Potter from his. As she began to write the first of what would be many letters, Augusta's jaw set with familiar determination. The wizarding world owed Harry Potter a debt that could never be fully repaid, but they could start by ensuring that he never had to return to Privet Drive again. The rain continued to fall, but inside Longbottom Manor, a new purpose was taking shape. Augusta had found her cause, and she would pursue it with all the fierce protective instinct of a woman who had already lost too much. Harry Potter would have a real home. She would see to it personally. Chapter 2. Investigating the Truth. The morning after Neville's revelations, Augusta Longbottom sat in her study before dawn, or surrounded by legal tomes that hadn't been disturbed in years. The heavy volumes of wizarding lore cast long shadows in the lamplight, their leather spines worn from her late husband's extensive research during his years working with the ministry. Henry Longbottom had been a methodical man, and his wife had inherited both his books and his thoroughness. Augusta's quill scratched across parchment as she took notes, her handwriting growing more urgent as the hours passed. Guardianship law in the wizarding world was complex, tangled with old precedents and newer statutes that often contradicted each other. But one thing was becoming clear: the placement of orphaned magical children was not absolute. There were provisions for review, for intervention, for change when circumstances warranted it. When the grandfather clock in the corner chimed 8 times, Augusta set down her quill and reached for the pot of flu powder on her desk. Her first stop would be St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. If she was going to build a case for Harry Potter's welfare, she needed to understand exactly what signs of abuse and neglect to look for. The green flames whooshed her into the busy lobby of St. Mungo's, where healers in lime green robes hurried between patients, and the welcome witch directed visitors with practiced efficiency. Augusta approached the reception desk with her most commanding presence, the one that had once made junior aurors straighten their shoulders and ministry officials reconsider their positions. "I need to speak with someone about the signs of child maltreatment," she announced without preamble, or specifically how to identify and document such abuse in magical children. The welcome witch blinked up at her, clearly taken aback by the directness of the request. That is, you'll want to speak with Healer Ashworth in the children's ward. She specializes in difficult cases." Augusta was directed to the 4th floor, where she found Healer Ashworth, a witch of middle years with kind eyes and prematurely grey hair, examining a young wizard whose arm appeared to be sprouting dandelions. The healer glanced up as Augusta entered, taking in her visitor's formal robes and stern expression. "Mrs. Longbottom," Healer Ashworth said with recognition, "I remember you from when your grandson was brought in after his accidental magic incidents. How may I help you today?" "I need information about child abuse," Augusta said, without sugarcoating. "How to recognize it, how to document it, and what the lasting effects might be on a child's development." Healer Ashworth's expression grew grave. She finished with her young patient, prescribing a simple charm to remove the flowers, then led Augusta to a private consultation room. "This is about a specific child, I take it?" the healer asked, settling into her chair. "It is. A boy of 11, raised by Muggle relatives since infancy. The signs are concerning." Augusta described what Neville had observed about Harry's condition, watching as the healer's face grew more troubled with each detail. "Chronic malnutrition," Healer Ashworth said grimly, taking notes of her own. "Likely stunted growth. Possible developmental delays in social situations. The flinching behavior suggests physical intimidation or worse. And housing a child in a cupboard." She shook her head. "That's psychological abuse designed to make the child feel worthless, unwanted. The effects can last well into adulthood. What would be needed to document such abuse for legal purposes? Augusta asked. A full medical examination would reveal the physical signs, malnutrition, any old injuries, signs of chronic stress. But honestly, Mrs. Longbottom, if even half of what you've described is true, any competent healer would immediately recognize the signs of severe neglect and abuse. Armed with this professional opinion, Augusta's next stop was far less official, but potentially more dangerous. She flew to a small tea room in Diagon Alley and sent a carefully worded message via owl. Mrs. Figg, I would like to discuss a matter of mutual concern regarding a young man we both know. Would you be available for tea this afternoon? A. Longbottom. The response came within the hour, a terse note agreeing to meet at a Muggle cafe in Little Whinging. Augusta had never met Arabella Figg personally, but she knew of her existence through Henry's old contacts in the ministry. The woman was a squib who lived on Privet Drive, officially to keep an eye on Harry Potter for Dumbledore's benefit. The cafe was small and forgettable, exactly the sort of place where two women could have a conversation without drawing attention. Augusta arrived early and claimed a corner table, watching as a thin, nervous-looking woman with wild grey hair entered 10 minutes later. Arabella Figg looked like exactly what she was, someone who had been carrying a terrible secret for far too long. Mrs. Longbottom? Arabella approached the table cautiously. I wasn't sure you'd be what I expected. And what did you expect? Augusta asked mildly, gesturing for the woman to sit. Someone less formidable, Arabella admitted, settling into a chair with visible tension. Your message mentioned Harry. I assume you know about my arrangement with Professor Dumbledore? Augusta nodded. I know you've been watching over the boy. What I want to know is what you've seen. Arabella's face crumpled slightly. Too much, she whispered. Far too much, and I've been powerless to stop any of it. Over the next hour, Arabella Figg painted a picture that made Augusta's hands shake with suppressed fury. Years of deliberate starvation, of the boy being worked like a house elf in the garden and around the house, of being locked in his room for days at a time. She described the bars that had been installed on his bedroom window the previous summer, the cat flap cut into his door to slide through minimal food. I tried to report it once, Arabella said, her voice barely audible. Called the local authorities. But Vernon Dursley works for a drill company, has connections with the local council. The social worker who came was a family friend of his. They made it look like Harry was just a difficult child, or told stories about his behavioral problems and tendency toward violence. No one believed that a successful businessman like Vernon would mistreat his nephew. And Dumbledore? Augusta asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Says the protection is worth any temporary hardship, Arabella said bitterly. Claims that as long as Harry can call Privet Drive home, his mother's sacrifice will keep him safe from Death Eaters. But what good is protection from external threats when the threat is coming from inside the house? Augusta left the meeting with Arabella's promise to provide a written statement of everything she had witnessed over the years. Her final stop of the day was back to her study, where she spent the evening researching legal precedents involving the Wizengamot's authority over child welfare. What she found was both promising and troubling. The Wizengamot had, in the past, intervened in cases where magical children were being mistreated by their guardians. There were precedents for removing children from harmful situations, even when those situations involved complex magical protections. But there were also cases where such interventions had been blocked by influential wizards claiming that the greater good required certain sacrifices. Augusta found herself thinking of Albus Dumbledore, the most influential wizard in magical Britain, the man who had personally placed Harry with the Dursleys. He would not give up his chosen arrangements easily, and he had the political weight to make any challenge extremely difficult. But Augusta had advantages of her own. The Longbottom family was old and respected, what with connections throughout the ministry that predated Dumbledore's current influence. More importantly, she had something that trumped political maneuvering, the undeniable truth of a child's suffering, and the moral imperative to end it. She pulled out a fresh piece of parchment and began drafting letters. The first was to Healer Ashworth, requesting a formal consultation about the medical implications of chronic child abuse. The second was to Mafalda Hopkirk at the Improper Use of Magic office, requesting any records of underage magic incidents at number 4, Privet Drive, incidents that might support claims of a hostile home environment. The third letter was the most important, addressed to Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Augusta had known Amelia's parents during the war, and the young woman had grown into a formidable advocate for justice. If anyone at the ministry would take these concerns seriously, it would be Amelia Bones. As the night grew late, Augusta continued her work, building a foundation of evidence and legal theory that could support a formal challenge to Harry Potter's guardianship. She documented everything: Neville's observations, Healer Ashworth's professional opinions, the legal precedents that supported intervention, and the growing body of evidence that Dumbledore's protection plan was causing more harm than good. When she finally set down her quill near midnight, Augusta felt a grim satisfaction. This was how real change happened, not through dramatic gestures or emotional appeals, but through careful preparation, documented evidence, and the relentless application of the law. Harry Potter had survived the killing curse as an infant, but he should not have to survive his childhood as well. Augusta would see to it that he didn't have to. The next phase would be more dangerous. She would have to formally challenge not just the Dursleys' guardianship, but the decision-making of the most powerful wizard in Britain. But Augusta had faced down Death Eaters during the war and ministry corruption in its aftermath. She was not about to be intimidated by anyone, no matter how many Order of Merlin awards they possessed. Harry Potter deserved better than a cupboard and bars on his windows, and Augusta Longbottom was going to make sure he got it. The candles in her study burned low as she sealed her letters and prepared them for morning delivery. By this time tomorrow, the wheels would be in motion for what might become the most important legal case of her lifetime. She owed it to Frank, who had died fighting for a better world. She owed it to Alice, who had sacrificed her sanity for the same cause. And she owed it to Harry, who had already given enough for the wizarding world's peace. Most of all, she owed it to Neville, who had trusted her with the truth about his friend's suffering and believed that she could do something about it. Augusta Longbottom had never been one to back down from a fight, and this fight was just beginning. Chapter 3. The Legal Challenge. The Wizengamot Administrative Office was bustling with the usual morning activity when Augusta Longbottom arrived, carrying a leather portfolio that contained what might be the most important legal documents filed in decades. The clerk at the reception desk, a young wizard with ink-stained fingers, looked up with mild interest that quickly transformed to attention when he recognized the formidable woman before him. "Mrs. Longbottom," he stammered, straightening his tie. "How may the Wizengamot serve you today?" "I'm filing an emergency petition for guardianship transfer," Augusta announced, setting her portfolio on the counter with the weight of absolute conviction. "The matter concerns Harry James Potter, currently under the guardianship of Vernon and Petunia Dursley of Little Whinging, Surrey." The clerk's quill froze mid-air. Around them, the background chatter of the office gradually died as other ministry employees stopped their work to stare. The boy who lived's guardianship was being challenged. This was unprecedented. You'll need to see Chief Clerk Weasley immediately," the young man managed. "This type of petition requires senior review and probably the Chief Warlock's immediate attention." Within minutes, Augusta found herself in the office of Percy Weasley, who had recently taken the position of Chief Clerk despite his young age. Percy examined the petition with the thoroughness that had already made him legendary among ministry staff, his face growing more serious with each page. "Mrs. Longbottom," Percy said finally, looking up from the documents, "this is an extraordinary petition. You're alleging systematic abuse and neglect of Harry Potter by his current guardians, and you're requesting immediate emergency custody transfer based on imminent danger to the child's welfare." "That is correct," Augusta replied calmly. "I have documented evidence, medical expert testimony, and witness statements to support every allegation." Percy flipped through the attached documents. Healer Ashworth's professional assessment, Arabella Figg's sworn statement detailing years of observed abuse, and Augusta's own meticulously researched legal brief arguing that the Wizengamot had both the authority and the obligation to intervene. "The Chief Warlock will need to review this immediately," Percy said, his voice betraying his recognition of the political earthquake this petition represented. "However, I must inform you that challenging a guardianship arrangement made by Albus Dumbledore, well, it's never been done before." "There's a first time for everything," Augusta said with steel in her voice. "Schedule the review, Mr. Weasley. The law is clear on child welfare matters, regardless of who made the original placement." As Augusta left the ministry, Percy Weasley was already dispatching urgent owls. The first went to Chief Warlock Dumbledore himself, the second to the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and the third to the Minister of Magic. By noon, the most powerful people in magical Britain would know that Augusta Longbottom was challenging the wisdom of Albus Dumbledore himself. Dumbledore received the owl while sitting in his office at Hogwarts, enjoying a quiet cup of tea between meetings with incoming professors. The elegant script on the ministry parchment seemed innocuous enough until he read the subject line, "Emergency petition for guardianship transfer, Harry James Potter." The teacup slipped from his fingers. For perhaps the first time in decades, Albus Dumbledore felt completely unprepared for what he was reading. The petition was thorough, professional, and devastating in its implications. Augusta Longbottom had not simply filed an emotional complaint, she had built a legal case that challenged the very foundation of his carefully constructed protection for Harry. More troubling still, she was right about many of her facts. The Dursleys had indeed treated Harry terribly. Dumbledore had known this, had accepted it as a necessary cost for the blood protection that kept Harry safe from far greater threats. But seeing it laid out in cold legal language, the malnutrition, the psychological abuse, the deliberate isolation, made it sound far worse than the unfortunate but necessary hardship he had convinced himself it was. Dumbledore flew immediately to the ministry, arriving in Minister Fudge's office with the urgency of a man whose entire strategic framework was under attack. "Cornelius," he said without preamble, "we have a situation." Fudge, who had been reviewing the same petition with growing alarm, looked up with relief. "Albus, thank Merlin you're here. This Longbottom woman. She's accusing you of knowingly placing Harry Potter in an abusive home. The political implications alone." "The placement was necessary," Dumbledore said firmly, though his usual calm seemed slightly strained. "The blood protection afforded by his mother's sacrifice is the only thing that has kept Harry safe from Voldemort's remaining followers. That protection requires him to live with his mother's blood relatives. But if the boy is being abused—" "I was monitoring the situation," Dumbledore insisted. "Mrs. Figg kept me informed of any serious concerns." "According to this petition, Mrs. Figg informed you of serious concerns regularly, and you consistently chose to leave the boy in place." Fudge's voice carried a note of accusation that Dumbledore had rarely heard from the minister. Before Dumbledore could respond, his flue activated again, and Augusta Longbottom stepped through with the bearing of a woman who owned every room she entered. "Professor Dumbledore," she said with icy politeness, "how fortuitous to find you here." The office fell silent, except for the ticking of Fudge's ornate clock. Two of the most formidable figures in the wizarding world faced each other across the minister's desk, and Fudge suddenly felt very much like a schoolboy caught between feuding professors. "Mrs. Longbottom," Dumbledore said carefully, "I understand you have concerns about Harry's welfare. Perhaps we could discuss this privately." The time for private discussions ended when you ignored 11 years of documented abuse. Augusta cut him off. We are well past the point where this can be resolved with a quiet conversation, and your assurances that everything is under control. Dumbledore's blue eyes lost some of their customary twinkle. You don't understand the complexities involved. Harry's safety requires— Harry's safety! Augusta's voice could have cut glass. Professor, the boy weighs perhaps 6 stone at age 11. He has been housed in a cupboard, systematically starved, and psychologically tormented by people who despise him for existing. In what way has your protection arrangement ensured his safety? The blood protection has kept him alive, Dumbledore said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Voldemort's followers would have killed him years ago without it. And the Dursleys have been killing him slowly for years with it, Augusta shot back. You speak of the greater good, Professor. But there is no good, greater or otherwise, in condemning a child to suffer for the convenience of adult strategies. Minister Fudge cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps there's a compromise to be reached here. Both Augusta and Dumbledore turned to look at him with expressions that made it clear they considered his input unwelcome. Fudge subsided into his chair. Professor, Augusta continued, her voice taking on the tone she had once used to cow ministry officials during her husband's career, I have filed a legal petition that will be reviewed by the full Wizengamot. The evidence of abuse is overwhelming, the law is clear, and the precedents are established. You can either work with this process or find yourself defending child abuse in open court. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled before him. When he spoke, his voice was softer, almost sad. Mrs. Longbottom, you are asking me to risk the life of the most important wizard of our time for the sake of comfort. I am asking you to stop torturing a child, Augusta replied flatly. If your protection requires Harry to suffer abuse, then your protection is worse than useless. Find another way, or step aside, and let people who care about the boy's welfare take responsibility. The confrontation might have continued indefinitely, but Percy Weasley's arrival interrupted with news that changed everything. Excuse me, Minister, but the Wizengamot Emergency Council has reviewed Mrs. Longbottom's petition and voted to schedule a full hearing within the week. They've also issued an emergency order for Mr. Potter to undergo a complete medical examination at St. Mungo's before the hearing. Dumbledore's face went pale. The Emergency Council only acted when they considered a matter of immediate and serious concern to a magical child's welfare. Their decision to schedule a full hearing meant that Augusta's evidence had convinced them that Harry was in genuine danger. Furthermore, Percy continued, clearly uncomfortable with the tension in the room, the Council has appointed Madame Bones to serve as the independent advocate for Mr. Potter's interests during the proceedings. Augusta allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. Amelia Bones was known throughout the ministry as utterly incorruptible and completely dedicated to justice above politics. With Bones advocating for Harry's interests, the case would be decided on evidence and law, not on Dumbledore's reputation or political connections. When is the hearing scheduled? Augusta asked. 1 week from today, 9 o'clock in the morning, in the Wizengamot chambers, Percy replied. While all parties will have 3 days to submit final evidence and witness lists. Dumbledore stood slowly, the weight of this unprecedented challenge to his authority clearly settling on his shoulders. Mrs. Longbottom, I hope you understand the potential consequences of this action. If the blood protection is compromised— The blood protection has already failed, Professor, Augusta interrupted. It was supposed to keep Harry safe, and instead it has been used to justify his torment. I would rather take my chances protecting him with love, proper wards, and a family that actually cares about his welfare. As Dumbledore left through the flue, Augusta turned to Minister Fudge with business-like efficiency. Minister, I'll need the cooperation of your office in arranging Mr. to Potter's medical examination and ensuring his safety until the hearing. I trust the ministry can manage that much." Fudge nodded eagerly, clearly relieved to have something concrete he could do to avoid further controversy. "Of course, Mrs. Longbottom. Whatever you need." By evening, the news had begun to leak, despite efforts to keep the proceedings quiet. Rita Skeeter's Quick Quotes quill was already working overtime on what would become the most explosive wizarding news story in years. Boy who lived rescued from abuse, Dumbledore's secret, shame, exposed. Augusta returned to Longbottom Manor that night, knowing that she had set in motion events that could not be undone. Within a week, the entire structure of Harry Potter's life would be examined under the harsh light of legal scrutiny. The outcome would determine not just where Harry lived, but whether the wizarding world would continue to accept that children could be sacrificed for the greater good. As she sat in her study, reviewing her case notes one final time, Augusta felt the weight of responsibility that came with challenging the most powerful wizard of the age. But she also felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the certainty that she was fighting for something that mattered more than politics, more than strategy, and more than reputation. She was fighting for a child who deserved better than the hand he had been dealt. And Augusta Longbottom had never backed down from a fight that mattered. The real battle was just beginning. Chapter 4. Harry's Rescue. The black ministry cars pulled up outside number 4, to Privet Drive with the quiet efficiency that marked all official wizarding business in Muggle neighborhoods. Augusta Longbottom stepped out of the lead vehicle, followed by 2 Aurors and a ministry social worker, their faces grim with the weight of their mission. The Wizengamot's emergency order had been clear. Harry Potter was to be removed from the Dursley home immediately pending the full hearing. Augusta straightened her formal robes and approached the front door with the bearing of someone who had every right to be there. When Vernon Dursley answered her firm knock, his face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally a deep purple rage that made his walrus-like mustache quiver with indignation. "What is the meaning of this?" Vernon blustered, his small eyes darting between the official-looking strangers on his doorstep. "If this is about the boys' abnormalities, we've kept them well contained, I assure you." "Mr. Dursley," Augusta said with icy politeness, "I am Augusta Longbottom, and these are representatives of the Ministry of Magic. We are here to collect Harry Potter under the authority of an emergency custody order issued by the Wizengamot." Vernon's face went from purple to an alarming shade of white. "You can't. That is... We're his legal guardians," Dumbledore said. "Professor Dumbledore's arrangement is currently under legal review." The ministry social worker, a stern witch named Madame Clearwater, interjected. "We have documentation of serious welfare concerns that require immediate intervention." From inside the house came Petunia's shrill voice. "Vernon, who is it? What do they want?" "Where is Harry now?" Augusta asked, her tone making it clear this was not a request. Vernon's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Behind him, Petunia appeared, her horse-like face pinched with panic. When she saw the official robes and badges, she seemed to shrink into herself. He's in his room," she whispered. "Show us," Augusta commanded. The walk through number 4, Privet Drive, was a revelation in itself. The house was obsessively clean and neat, filled with furniture that spoke of middle-class comfort and success. Family photographs lined the walls, showing the Dursleys' pampered son, Dudley, at various stages of his overfed childhood. There was no sign anywhere that another child lived in this house. When they reached the stairs, Augusta noticed the locks, multiple locks, installed on the outside of a bedroom door. Her jaw tightened as the full implications became clear. "Harry," Petunia called nervously, unlocking the door with shaking hands. "There are people here to see you." The door opened to reveal what could generously be called a bedroom, though it was barely larger than a cupboard. The window was barred, a cat flap had been cut into the door, and the furniture consisted of a narrow bed, a rickety desk, and little else. The smell of unwashed clothes and fear hung in the air. On the bed sat a boy so thin that Augusta's breath caught in her throat. Harry Potter looked up at them, with startlingly green eyes that held far too much wariness for someone his age. His dark hair was messy and too long, clearly cut by amateur hands, and his clothes hung on his small frame like sacks. "Harry," Augusta said gently, kneeling down to bring herself to his eye level. "My name is Augusta Longbottom. I'm Neville's grandmother. Do you remember Neville talking about me?" Harry's eyes flickered with recognition, but his expression remained guarded. "Yes, Mum," he said quietly. Is something wrong? Am I in trouble?" The question broke Augusta's heart. This child's first assumption when adults appeared was that he had done something wrong. "No, dear boy," she said softly. "You're not in trouble. We're here because we're concerned about you, and we'd like you to come stay somewhere safe while some grown-ups sort out some complicated matters." Harry's gaze darted between the adults, clearly trying to understand what was happening. "But this is where I live. Uncle Vernon said I have to stay here during holidays." "Harry," Madam Clearwater stepped forward with official gentleness, "we have reason to believe that you haven't been treated well here. We'd like to take you somewhere safe while we investigate." For a moment, Harry looked confused. Then his expression shifted to something that might have been panic. I haven't done any magic. I swear I haven't. And I've been good. I've done all my chores. I haven't broken anything." Augusta felt something fierce and protective surge in her chest. This boy was defending his abusers, or convinced that he somehow deserved their treatment. "Harry," she said firmly but kindly, "you have done nothing wrong. Nothing at all. We're not here because you've misbehaved. We're here because some adults need to answer for how they've treated you." "Treated me?" Harry's voice was small, bewildered. "But this is normal, isn't it?" The question hung in the air like a physical weight. From behind them came Vernon's bluster. "Now see here, the boy is perfectly fine. We've clothed him and fed him and kept a roof over his head." One of the auras silenced him with a sharp look. Augusta stood slowly, her eyes never leaving Harry's face. "Harry, would you like to pack some things? We're going to take you somewhere safe, where you'll have your own proper room and regular meals and people who care about your well-being." Harry hesitated, clearly struggling with concepts that seemed foreign to him. Will I be able to come back, if I'm good?" The innocent question nearly broke Augusta's composure. "Oh, my dear boy," she whispered, "you never have to come back here if you don't want to. Not ever." It took 20 minutes for Harry to gather his few belongings, some 2 small clothes, his school books, and his owl Hedwig. Augusta noticed that he owned virtually nothing that wasn't directly related to his magical education. No toys, no personal items, no mementos of a normal childhood. The ride to St. Mungo's was quiet, with Harry sitting stiffly beside Augusta in the back of the ministry car. He kept glancing around as if expecting someone to tell him this was all a mistake, that he needed to go back to his cupboard. "Harry," Augusta said gently as they drove through London, "we're going to take you to a hospital first, just so a healer can make sure you're healthy. Then we'll go to my home, where Neville is waiting to see you." "Neville's there?" For the first time, Harry's face showed something other than wariness. "He is. He's been very worried about you since he came home from school. He cares about you very much." Harry was quiet for a moment. Is that why you came? Because Neville was worried?" "Partly," Augusta admitted, "but mostly because every child deserves to be safe and loved, and it's clear that you haven't been either of those things." The medical examination at St. Mungo's was both thorough and heartbreaking. Healer Ashworth worked with gentle efficiency, documenting each sign of neglect with the clinical precision required for legal evidence. Harry submitted to the examination with the resigned compliance of someone accustomed to having no control over what happened to his body. "Significant malnutrition," Healer Ashworth murmured to Augusta, her voice carefully neutral for Harry's benefit. "Growth stunting, likely permanent in some aspects. Signs of chronic stress, possible mild cognitive delays due to prolonged malnutrition during crucial developmental years. Old injuries that healed poorly without proper medical attention." Augusta listened with growing fury, but kept her expression calm for Harry's sake. The boy was already overwhelmed. He didn't need to see the adults around him becoming emotional. "There are also psychological indicators," the healer continued quietly. "Hypervigilance, defensive posturing, learned helplessness. This child has been systematically conditioned to expect abuse." When the examination was complete, Healer Ashworth knelt down beside Harry with a kind smile. "Well, young man, you're going to be just fine. We're going to give you some nutritional supplements to help you grow properly, and some treatments to help with those old injuries. How does that sound?" Harry nodded solemnly. "Thank you, Mum. How much will it cost?" "I don't have any money." The casual assumption that medical care had to be paid for, that he somehow owed something for basic kindness, was another knife to Augusta's heart. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly, don't need to worry about money. Taking care of you is what adults are supposed to do." The ride to Longbottom Manor was quieter still, with Harry staring out the window at the countryside rolling past. When they finally arrived at the imposing but welcoming estate, Harry's eyes widened at the gardens, the well-maintained grounds, the sense of space and peace that surrounded the old house. "This is where you live?" he asked Augusta in wonderment. "This is where we live," she corrected gently. "For as long as you need it to be." Neville was waiting in the entrance hall, practically bouncing with nervous energy. When he saw Harry, his face lit up with relief and joy. "Harry!" he exclaimed, rushing forward before stopping short, taking in his friend's thin frame and hollow cheeks. "I'm so glad you're here. Are you all right?" Harry looked between Neville and Augusta, still clearly struggling to understand this new reality, where people seemed genuinely pleased to see him. "I think so," he said uncertainly. "Your grandmother says I can stay here for a while." "Of course you can," Neville said firmly. "Gran's already had a room prepared for you. It's right next to mine, and it has a really big window that looks out over the garden, and your own desk and—" As Neville chattered enthusiastically about the room arrangements, Augusta watched Harry's face carefully. She could see the exact moment when the reality began to sink in, that this wasn't temporary, that these people actually wanted him here, that he might actually be safe. The tour of Longbottom Manor was a revelation for Harry. His new bedroom was larger than the Dursleys' sitting room, with tall windows, comfortable furniture, and shelves waiting to be filled with his belongings. When Augusta showed him the wardrobe filled with clothes in his actual size, Harry touched the fabric with trembling fingers. "These are for me," he whispered. "All for you," Augusta confirmed. "We'll get more tomorrow if these don't fit quite right." That evening, as they sat down to dinner in the family dining room, Harry stared at the plate of food before him, as if he couldn't quite believe it was real. The portions were generous but not overwhelming. The food was well prepared and abundant, and no one seemed to be keeping track of how much he ate. "Harry," Augusta said gently, "you can eat as much or as little as you like. There's plenty of food, and there will be plenty tomorrow as well." Harry took a tentative bite, then another, and gradually began to eat with the concentrated focus of someone who had never been certain when their next meal would come. As Augusta watched him, she felt the full weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about winning a legal case anymore. This was about healing a child who had been systematically broken by the people who should have loved him. But looking at Harry's face as he began to relax in the warmth and safety of a real home, Augusta knew she had made the right choice. Every child deserved this. Safety, care, the certainty that they mattered to someone. Harry Potter had already saved the Wizarding World once. Now it was time for the Wizarding World to save him. That night, but as Augusta tucked Harry into his new bed, the first time anyone had ever done such a thing for him, she made a silent promise. Whatever the cost, whatever the opposition, she would make sure this child never went back to that cupboard, never went hungry again, never had to wonder if he was worth caring about. Harry Potter was home at last. Chapter 5. Learning to Trust. Harry woke from his third nightmare of the week with a strangled gasp, his body rigid with terror as his mind struggled to separate dream from reality. In the nightmare, he had been back in his cupboard, listening to Uncle Vernon's heavy footsteps approaching, knowing that some punishment was coming, but not understanding what he had done wrong this time. But as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw moonlight streaming through tall windows, or felt the softness of clean sheets beneath him, and slowly remembered where he was. Longbottom Manor. Safe. The thought still felt foreign, like trying on clothes that didn't quite fit. A gentle knock on his door made Harry freeze. In his experience, adults who came to his room at night brought nothing good with them. "Harry?" Augusta's voice was soft through the wooden door. "I heard you cry out." "Are you all right, dear?" Harry's throat felt tight. He wanted to say he was fine, to send her away, to not be a burden. But something about Augusta's tone, patient, concerned, without any hint of annoyance, made him whisper, "I'm okay." "May I come in for a moment?" Harry pulled the blankets up to his chin and nodded, then realized she couldn't see him. "Yes, Mum." Augusta entered quietly, wearing a dressing gown and carrying a small lamp that cast a warm glow around the room. She moved slowly, deliberately, giving Harry plenty of warning about her movements. In the 3 days since he'd arrived, Harry had noticed that both Augusta and Neville were careful never to surprise him, never to move too quickly in his direction. "Another nightmare?" she asked gently, settling into the chair beside his bed. Harry nodded, not trusting his voice. He expected her to tell him to go back to sleep, to stop being a baby, to quit disturbing the household with his problems. Instead, Augusta simply sat with him in comfortable silence for several minutes. "Would you like to talk about it?" she finally asked. "It's nothing," Harry said automatically, seeing the response trained into him over years of being told his fears and concerns didn't matter. Augusta studied his face in the lamplight. "Harry, nightmares are never nothing. They're your mind's way of processing difficult experiences. You've been through a great deal, and it's perfectly natural for your dreams to be troubled." Harry blinked at her in surprise. He had never heard an adult acknowledge that his feelings might be valid, that his reactions might be normal, rather than evidence of some fundamental weakness. "I dreamed I was back there," he admitted quietly. "In the cupboard. Uncle Vernon was coming, and I didn't know what I'd done wrong. But I knew." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "You knew you were going to be hurt," Augusta finished gently. Harry nodded, tears threatening to spill over. "As I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream, that I'm really still there, and everything good was just something I imagined." Augusta's heart clenched at the raw vulnerability in his voice. "Oh, my dear boy," she said softly. "This is real. You are safe. You are wanted here, and you are never going back to that place." "But what if I do something wrong?" Harry's voice was barely a whisper. "What if I disappoint you, or break something, or—" "Harry." Augusta's voice was firm but kind. "Do you know what Neville did last week?" Harry shook his head, confused by the change of subject. "He was practicing his wand movements in the garden and accidentally transfigured my prized roses into turnips, every single one of them." Augusta's eyes twinkled with gentle humor. "Do you know what happened to him?" "He got in trouble," Harry guessed hesitantly. "He helped me research the counter-charm," spent the afternoon fixing his mistake, and learned to be more careful with his practice location. Then we had a good laugh about it over dinner. Augusta leaned forward slightly. Children make mistakes, Harry. That's how they learn. Good families help each other fix the mistakes and learn from them. They don't use mistakes as excuses for cruelty. The concept was so foreign to Harry that he could barely process it. Mistakes had consequences at Privet Drive, but those consequences were always punishment, never learning or growth. "Why don't you try to get some more sleep?" Augusta suggested. "And Harry, if the nightmares come back, you can always come find me. Day or night, it doesn't matter. And that's what family does. We take care of each other." After Augusta left, Harry lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and turning her words over in his mind. Family. She kept using that word, as if he actually belonged here, as if he was more than just a temporary burden they were tolerating out of charity. The next morning, Harry came down to breakfast to find Neville already at the table, enthusiastically describing a herbology project he wanted to start in the garden. Harry slipped into his seat quietly, still half expecting someone to tell him he wasn't allowed to eat with the family, that he should take his food elsewhere. "Good morning, Harry," Augusta said, warmly, setting a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast in front of him. "Did you manage to get back to sleep?" Harry nodded, touched that she remembered, that she cared enough to ask. At the Dursleys, his sleepless nights had been treated as just another inconvenience he inflicted on them. "Gran," Neville said suddenly, "I was thinking Harry might like to help me with the bouncing bulbs project. If he wants to, I mean," he added quickly, glancing at Harry with hopeful uncertainty. Harry looked up from his breakfast in surprise. "You'd want my help?" "Of course," Neville said with genuine enthusiasm. "You were brilliant in herbology class, and it would be more fun with someone else helping." I've never really gardened before," Harry admitted. "The Dursleys made me do yard work, but that was different. That was just punishment chores." Augusta's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly at this casual reference to Harry's treatment, but her voice remained gentle. "Well, then this will be quite different indeed. Neville, why don't you show Harry around the gardens after breakfast? But remember, he's still recovering his strength, so nothing too strenuous." As the boys finished their meal and headed outside, Augusta watched through the window as Neville eagerly pointed out different plants and magical growing techniques. Harry followed along quietly, still hesitant but clearly interested, when Neville handed him a small watering can and showed him how to properly tend to some magical seedlings. Harry accepted it with the careful reverence of someone who had never been trusted with anything valuable before. "See how the leaves shimmer when they're getting the right amount of water?" Neville was saying. "And if you sing to them, I know it sounds silly, but it really works. They grow faster and stronger." Augusta smiled as she watched Harry tentatively hum a few notes to a small plant, his face lighting up when the leaves responded with a gentle golden glow. For the first time since his arrival, he looked like what he was, a normal 11-year-old boy discovering something wonderful. That afternoon, as Augusta worked in her study, she became aware of raised voices from the kitchen. Not angry voices, but the kind of animated discussion that often occurred between children. When the voices grew more heated, she set down her quill and went to investigate. She found Harry and Neville in the middle of what appeared to be a friendly argument about Quidditch teams, as with Harry insisting that the Chudley Cannons weren't completely hopeless, and Neville laughing as he recited their dismal statistics from the past decade. "They haven't won a match in 3 years, Harry," Neville was saying through his giggles. 3 years. But that just means they're due for a victory," Harry protested, and Augusta was struck by the animation in his voice, the normal childhood stubbornness that she had never seen from him before. Both boys looked up when they noticed her in the doorway, and Harry's expression immediately shifted to wariness, as if he expected to be scolded for being too loud, for taking up space, for daring to have opinions. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. We weren't trying to be loud, we just— Harry, Augusta interrupted gently. You have nothing to apologize for. But I was just enjoying hearing you boys have a proper discussion. Though I have to say, Neville is quite right about the cannons. Harry's mouth fell open in surprise, and then, for the first time since she had known him, he laughed. Really laughed, with genuine amusement and joy, the sound filling the kitchen like sunlight. Et tu, Mrs. Longbottom? He said with theatrical despair, and Neville dissolved into fresh giggles. That evening, as they sat in the family parlour after dinner, Harry found himself curled up in one of the comfortable armchairs with a book, while Neville worked on a letter to one of their Hogwarts friends, and Augusta reviewed some correspondence. The scene was so peaceful, so normal, that Harry kept stealing glances around the room to convince himself it was real. Harry, Augusta said without looking up from her letter, you've been very quiet this evening. Is everything all right? Harry hesitated, then decided to risk honesty. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, he admitted. This is all so nice. And in my experience, nice things don't last. Augusta set down her correspondence and looked at him directly. What would help you feel more secure? What would convince you that this isn't temporary? The question surprised Harry with its directness. Adults at Privet Drive had never asked what he needed or wanted. They had simply told him what he would get, which was usually nothing. I don't know, he said honestly. I don't really know how families are supposed to work. Well, Augusta said thoughtfully. In this family, we talk to each other when we're worried or upset. We help each other with problems. We celebrate each other's successes. We make mistakes and forgive each other for them. And most importantly, we stick together, especially when things get difficult. Like a team? Harry asked tentatively. Exactly like a team, Neville chimed in from his writing desk. Gran always says that families are the most important team you'll ever be on. Harry nodded slowly, the concept beginning to make sense. And I'm really part of your team now. You are, Augusta said firmly, for as long as you want to be, and longer than that if necessary. That night, for the first time since his arrival, Harry fell asleep without fear. The nightmares would return. Healing wasn't linear, and trust took time to build. But for one night, out in a house where people spoke kindly to him and laughed at his jokes and asked what he needed, Harry Potter slept peacefully. In her own room down the hall, Augusta lay awake thinking about the long road ahead. The legal hearing was still coming, with all its uncertainties and potential complications. There would be more nightmares, more moments of fear and doubt, more setbacks in Harry's journey toward healing. But watching him laugh that afternoon, seeing him engage in a normal childhood argument about Quidditch, observing the way he had gradually relaxed throughout the day, these small victories gave her hope. Harry was stronger than his trauma, resilient in ways that spoke to the fundamental goodness of his spirit. The Dursleys had tried to break him, to convince him that he was worthless and unwanted. But they had failed. What beneath the wariness and the learned helplessness, Harry Potter was still fighting, still hoping, still capable of joy and trust and love. Augusta smiled in the darkness. They would get through this together, all three of them. They were a family now, and families protected each other. No matter what came next, Harry would never face it alone again. Chapter 6. The Wizengamot Hearing. The ancient chambers of the Wizengamot had never seen a crowd like this. Every seat in the circular courtroom was filled, with additional spectators crowded into the upper galleries. Representatives from major wizarding newspapers sat with quick quotes, quills poised, while concerned citizens who had followed the case through the papers watched with rapt attention. At the center of it all, in the imposing chair reserved for the chief warlock, sat Albus Dumbledore, his usual twinkling demeanor notably absent. Augusta Longbottom entered the chamber with the bearing of a woman who had never doubted her cause was just. Behind her walked Amelia Bones, whose reputation for fairness and incorruptibility had made her the obvious choice to advocate for Harry's interests. At a separate table sat a nervous-looking wizard representing the Ministry's interest in maintaining existing guardianship arrangements. Harry himself was not present in the main chamber. At 11 years old, he would give his testimony in private, away from the intense scrutiny of the public gallery. But Augusta could feel his presence nonetheless, could picture him waiting in the small side chamber with Neville, both boys trying to understand how the next few hours would determine Harry's entire future. "The Wizengamot will come to order," Dumbledore's voice rang out across the chamber, magically amplified to reach every corner. Despite his position as Chief Warlock, the obvious conflict of interest had prompted whispered discussions among the assembly. Never before had someone been asked to preside over a case that challenged their own decisions so directly. "We are here to consider the petition of Augusta Longbottom for emergency transfer of guardianship of Harry James Potter, currently placed with Vernon and Petunia Dursley of Little Whinging, Surrey." Dumbledore's voice was steady, but those who knew him well could detect the strain beneath his controlled facade. Amelia Bones rose to address the assembly, her burgundy robes lending additional gravity to her already imposing presence. "Chief Warlock, members of the Wizengamot, we are here today because a child's welfare has been systematically ignored in favor of adult convenience. The evidence we will present demonstrates beyond any reasonable doubt that Harry Potter has been subjected to severe abuse and neglect by his current guardians." She gestured to the stack of documents before her. "We have medical testimony, witness statements, and photographic evidence that paints a picture of cruelty that should shock the conscience of anyone who claims to care about magical children." Madam Bones began with the medical evidence, calling Healer Ashworth to the witness stand. The healer's testimony was clinical but devastating, describing in precise detail the signs of chronic malnutrition, psychological trauma, and systematic neglect she had documented during Harry's examination. "In 30 years of practice," Healer Ashworth stated firmly, "I have rarely seen such clear evidence of prolonged child abuse. The patient showed signs of chronic stress, learned helplessness, and what we in the medical community call failure to thrive, a condition where a child's growth and development are significantly impaired by their environment." "And in your professional opinion," Amelia Bones asked, "what would be the long-term effects if Mr. Potter were to remain in such an environment?" "Permanent psychological damage," Healer Ashworth replied without hesitation. "Continued physical stunting, potential cognitive delays, and a severely compromised ability to form healthy relationships. The boy has already suffered more trauma than most adults endure in a lifetime." When Dumbledore rose to cross-examine, his questions were gentle but persistent. "Healer Ashworth, you are aware, are you not, that Mr. Potter's placement with his relatives provides him with magical protection that has literally kept him alive for the past 11 years?" "I am aware of those claims," the healer replied carefully. "However, protection that requires a child to suffer abuse is not protection at all. It is simply delayed harm by other means." The next witness was Arabella Figg, whose testimony proved even more damaging to the current arrangement. With her voice shaking but determined, she recounted years of observing Harry's treatment, her repeated attempts to intervene, and her instructions from Dumbledore to monitor, but not interfere, unless Harry's life was in immediate danger. "I watched that child be starved, ignored, and terrorized for years," Arabella said, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. "I reported these concerns to Professor Dumbledore regularly, begging him to move Harry somewhere safe. Each time, I was told that the protection was more important than the boy's immediate comfort." "Mrs. Figg," Augusta's legal counsel asked, "in your observation, did this protection actually protect Mr. Potter from harm?" "No," Arabella said firmly. "It protected him from one type of harm while subjecting him to another. Harry Potter was dying slowly at Privet Drive, just as surely as if you-know-whose followers had found him. When Dumbledore rose to question Mrs. Figg, his approach was more aggressive. You were instructed to watch over Harry, not to interfere with arrangements made for his ultimate safety. Do you not understand the broader implications of the protection he enjoys? I understand that a child was suffering, Arabella shot back with unexpected steel, and I understand that no magical protection is worth the price that boy has paid for it. The testimony continued through the morning, with character witnesses painting a picture of Harry's condition that grew more heartbreaking with each statement. Professor McGonagall, called as a witness by Augusta's team, reluctantly testified about her concerns regarding Harry's placement, admitting that she had expressed reservations to Dumbledore from the very beginning. I observed the Dursley family the day Harry was placed with them, McGonagall said stiffly. I found them to be prejudiced, close-minded, and hostile to anything they didn't understand. And I expressed my concerns to Professor Dumbledore at the time, but I was assured that the arrangement was necessary. And Professor McGonagall, Amelia Bones asked, based on your subsequent observations of Mr. Potter at Hogwarts, would you say your initial concerns were justified? McGonagall's jaw tightened. Mr. Potter arrived at Hogwarts, showing clear signs of neglect. He was undernourished, undersized for his age, and possessed virtually no knowledge of the wizarding world despite being its most famous resident. His clothes were ill-fitting hand-me-downs, and he exhibited behavioral patterns consistent with children who have experienced significant trauma. When the morning session concluded for lunch, the crowd in the galleries buzzed with animated discussions. The evidence against the Dursley placement had been overwhelming. But everyone knew the afternoon would bring Dumbledore's counter-argument, the blood protection that had allegedly kept Harry alive for 11 years. The afternoon session began with Dumbledore himself taking the witness stand. Despite the obvious conflict of interest, his testimony was allowed under the special circumstances of the case. His arguments were articulate and impassioned, focusing on the magical protection that Harry enjoyed, due to his mother's sacrifice. The protection Harry Potter enjoys is ancient magic of the most powerful kind, Dumbledore explained to the rapt assembly. As long as he can call his mother's blood, relatives' home, his own, that protection endures. It has saved his life on multiple occasions, preventing Death Eaters from locating or harming him. Professor Dumbledore, the Ministry's representative asked, in your expert opinion, is this protection worth the difficulties Mr. Potter has experienced with his relatives? I believe it is worth his life, Dumbledore replied gravely. The alternative to his placement with the Dursleys was likely death at the hands of Voldemort's remaining followers. No temporary hardship can compare to that ultimate consequence. But when Amelia Bones rose for cross-examination, her questions cut straight to the heart of Dumbledore's argument. Professor Dumbledore, you speak of temporary hardship, but Mr. Potter has lived with the Dursleys for nearly 11 years. In what sense is over a decade of abuse temporary? In the sense that it has kept him alive to reach an age where he can protect himself, Dumbledore replied, though his voice carried less conviction than before. And Professor, are you aware of any other instances in recorded magical history where a child's placement was deliberately maintained despite documented abuse because of claimed magical protection? Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. No, he admitted. This is an unprecedented situation. Indeed it is, Amelia Bones said firmly, and perhaps that should tell us something about the wisdom of the approach. The most crucial testimony came when Harry himself was called to give evidence in the Chief Warlock's private chambers, with only the most essential witnesses present. Augusta watched as the small boy was escorted in, his face pale but determined. She had spent hours preparing him for this moment, explaining that telling the truth was the most important thing he could do, not just for himself, but for other children who might face similar situations. Harry's testimony, though given in private, was transcribed and read to the full assembly afterward. His simple, matter-of-fact recounting of his life at Privet Drive was more devastating than any legal argument could have been. They told me I was a freak, Harry had said quietly. They said my parents were freaks too, and that they died in a car crash because they were drunk. They made me sleep in the cupboard under the stairs until I got my Hogwarts letter. Uncle Vernon said I was lucky they bothered to feed me at all, or since I was just a burden they never asked for. When asked about specific incidents, Harry had recounted being locked in his room with bars on the windows, being made to cook meals he wasn't allowed to eat, and being punished for things he couldn't control, like his hair growing back too fast, or accidentally making the glass disappear at the zoo. I thought all families were like that, Harry had concluded. I didn't know people were supposed to be kind to children. I thought there was something wrong with me that made adults angry just by existing. The transcription of his testimony was read in absolute silence, broken only by the scratching of reporters' quills and the occasional gasp of shock from the gallery. When all testimony had been heard, Augusta rose for her closing argument. The chamber fell completely silent as she walked to the center of the floor, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "Members of the Wizengamot," she began, "we have heard much today about protection, about sacrifice, and about the greater good. But I ask you to remember that we are talking about a child who was placed in the care of people who despised him, who was systematically starved and abused, who was taught to believe he was worthless and unloved." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "Professor Dumbledore argues that this treatment was necessary for Harry's protection. But I submit to you that protection, which requires a child to suffer, is not protection at all. It is simply a different form of violence." Augusta turned to face Dumbledore directly. "You speak of the greater good, Professor. But what good can come from breaking a child's spirit? What victory is worth the price of Harry Potter's childhood? What cause is so important that it justifies teaching a child that he deserves to be hurt?" She faced the assembly again, her voice ringing with conviction. "Harry Potter has already saved our world once. He defeated the most dangerous dark wizard of our time when he was barely more than a baby. He has paid more than his share of the price for our freedom. The very least we owe him in return is safety, love, and the chance to be a normal child." "The law is clear on child welfare matters," Augusta concluded. "No child should be forced to endure abuse for any reason, no matter how compelling the justification might seem. I ask you to choose Harry Potter's right to safety and happiness over abstract theories about magical protection. I ask you to choose the welfare of a child over the convenience of adult strategies." She paused, looking around the chamber at the faces of the witches and wizards who would decide Harry's fate. "Most importantly, I ask you to remember that we are judged not by how we treat the powerful, but by how we protect the vulnerable. Harry Potter is a child who deserves better than what he has been given. Today, you have the power to give it to him." As Augusta returned to her seat, the chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then the Wizengamot retired to deliberate, leaving behind a crowd that buzzed with whispered conversations and speculation. 3 hours later, they returned with their verdict. "The Wizengamot has reached a unanimous decision," Dumbledore announced, his voice carefully controlled. "In the matter of the guardianship of Harry James Potter, we find that the current placement is not in the child's best interests and poses ongoing danger to his welfare." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but Dumbledore raised his hand for silence. "Guardianship is hereby transferred to Augusta Longbottom, with provisions for maintaining the blood protection through modified ward schemes and regular monitoring. The Dursley family is prohibited from any contact with Mr. Potter without explicit consent from his new guardian and approval from this body." As the gavel fell and the formal session ended, Augusta felt a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying lift from her shoulders. Around her, people pressed forward to offer congratulations and support, but her eyes were on the small side door where Harry and Neville waited. When she reached them, Harry looked up at her with eyes that held a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Is it over?" he asked quietly. "It's over," Augusta confirmed, pulling both boys into a fierce embrace. "You're coming home with us. For good." As they left the Wizengamot chambers together, Augusta knew that the real work was just beginning. Healing Harry's trauma, helping him build a new life, and creating the family bonds that would sustain them all. These tasks would take far longer than any legal proceeding. But today, they had won something precious. The right to try. The right to love Harry without reservation, to protect him without apology, and to give him the childhood he should have had from the beginning. Harry Potter was finally, truly safe. And he was home. Chapter 7. A New Home. The great hall of Longbottom Manor had never hosted such a celebration. Word of the Wizengamot's decision had spread through the wizarding community with the speed of Phoenix song, and by evening, friends, supporters, and well-wishers had gathered to congratulate Augusta on her victory and welcome Harry officially into the family. House elves bustled about with trays of food and butterbeer, while the ancient portraits that lined the walls whispered excitedly about the historic day. Harry sat in what Augusta had designated as his chair at the head table, still somewhat overwhelmed by the attention. Throughout the evening, stranger after stranger had approached to shake his hand, or tell him how proud they were of his courage, and express their outrage at his previous treatment. While their kindness was genuine, Harry found himself retreating inward, unused to being the center of so much positive attention. "You're looking a bit peaked, dear," Augusta observed, settling into the chair beside him, as the crowd continued their animated discussions. "This is rather overwhelming, isn't it?" Harry nodded gratefully, relieved that someone understood his discomfort without requiring explanation. "I'm not used to all this," he admitted quietly. "Everyone keeps congratulating me, but I didn't really do anything." "You did the most important thing of all," Augusta corrected gently. "You told the truth. That took tremendous courage, especially when that truth was painful to share." Before Harry could respond, now Dumbledore approached their table. The elderly wizard looked every one of his many years, his usual energetic demeanor subdued by the day's events. The celebration around them quieted as people noticed the former chief warlock approaching. "Augusta," Dumbledore said with weary dignity, "I wanted to speak with you before I left." Augusta gestured to the chair across from them, her expression polite but reserved. "Of course, Albus. Please, sit." Dumbledore settled heavily into the offered seat, his blue eyes focusing on Harry with an expression that mixed regret with genuine concern. "Harry, my boy, I owe you an apology. A profound one." Harry blinked in surprise. In his experience, adults rarely apologize to children, and never for anything significant. "I believe that the protection afforded by your mother's blood was worth any price," Dumbledore continued, his voice carrying the weight of sincere remorse. "I convinced myself that your temporary suffering was acceptable if it kept you alive. I was wrong." "Sir," Harry's voice was uncertain. He had spent so long thinking of adults as infallible authorities that the concept of one admitting error was difficult to process. "The Wizengamot was correct in their decision," Dumbledore said firmly. "No child should endure what you endured, regardless of the justification. I let my fear for your physical safety blind me to the damage being done to your spirit." Augusta watched this exchange carefully, recognizing both the sincerity of Dumbledore's regret and the importance of this moment for Harry's healing. "However," Dumbledore continued, his tone shifting to one of gentle warning, "the threats that necessitated your original placement haven't disappeared. Voldemort's followers remain free, and they will not forget who defeated their master. The blood protection that kept you safe at Privet Drive will need to be replaced with other defenses." "That's already been arranged," Augusta replied firmly. The Wizengamot's conditions were quite specific. "Master Wardsmith Grimwald will be arriving tomorrow to establish protection schemes around the manor that rival anything Hogwarts can offer." Dumbledore nodded slowly. "And Harry's schooling?" I assume he will continue at Hogwarts? If Harry wishes to, Augusta said, glancing at the boy in question. But that decision is his to make, and it will be made based on what's best for his education and happiness, not on what's politically convenient. The subtle barb landed as intended, and Dumbledore accepted it without complaint. Of course. Harry, I hope you know that Hogwarts will always be open to you, and that I deeply regret the mistakes I made in my eagerness to protect you. After Dumbledore left, the celebration continued well into the evening, but Augusta could see that Harry was reaching the limits of his social endurance. She began politely encouraging their guests to continue their celebrations elsewhere, and by 9 o'clock the manor had returned to its usual peaceful quiet. Well, Augusta said as the last guest departed, that was quite a day. Harry and Neville, who had spent the latter part of the evening hiding in the library with a collection of chocolate frogs, emerged from their refuge, looking relieved that the crowd had dispersed. Was it always going to be this big a deal? Harry asked, slumping into his favourite armchair in the family parlour. The hearing, I mean. All the people and the newspapers and everything? I'm afraid so, Augusta replied, settling into her own chair with a contented sigh. Your case has implications beyond just your personal situation, Harry. It establishes important precedents about children's rights in the wizarding world. What kind of precedents? Neville asked, curling up on the sofa with a book about advanced herbology. That no child can be forced to endure abuse for any reason, Augusta explained. That the welfare of individual children matters more than abstract concepts of the greater good. That adults in positions of authority can be challenged when they make decisions that harm children. Harry considered this thoughtfully. So, other kids might be helped because of what happened today? Almost certainly, Augusta confirmed. The Ministry has already announced plans for new legislation to strengthen child protections laws, and several other guardianship cases are being reviewed in light of today's decision. The thought that his suffering might help prevent other children from experiencing the same treatment gave Harry a sense of purpose he had never felt before. For the first time, the pain he had endured seemed to serve some meaningful function. Now then, Augusta said, pulling out a rolled parchment tied with green ribbon, we have some official business to attend to. She unrolled the document with ceremonial care, revealing an elaborately illuminated adoption decree bearing the seal of the Wizengamot and the signature of the Minister of Magic. Harry James Potter, she read formally, though her eyes twinkled with warmth, you are hereby officially adopted into the Longbottom family, with all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities thereof. You may choose to keep your current name or take our family name, as you prefer. Harry stared at the document, his throat tight with emotion. I can really be a Longbottom? If you want to be, Augusta said gently, though there's no pressure either way. Your name is part of your identity, and that choice is entirely yours. Harry was quiet for a long moment, considering. Could I be Harry Potter Longbottom? He asked tentatively. I don't want to lose my parents' name, but I'd like to belong to your family too. Augusta's smile could have lit the entire manor. Harry Potter Longbottom it is then, though that's quite a mouthful for everyday use. We could call him HPL, Neville suggested with a grin, like those initials you see on fancy luggage. Harry laughed, the sound still coming more easily than it had just weeks before. I like that. It makes me sound important. You are important, Augusta said firmly. Not because you're the boy who lived, but because you're our boy now. Over the following days, Harry began to understand what it truly meant to belong to a family. While Augusta took both boys shopping in Diagon Alley, not just for school supplies, but for personal items. Books Harry wanted to read, clothes that actually fit him, a proper writing desk for his room, and countless small things that made Longbottom Manor feel like home rather than just a temporary refuge. The media attention was intense, but manageable. Augusta had hired a publicist to handle interview requests, and ensure that Harry's privacy was protected, while still allowing enough access to maintain public support for the new child protection legislation. "You've become quite the celebrity," Neville observed one morning as they ate breakfast and read the Daily Prophet's latest article about the boy who lived's new beginning. "Look, they've got a whole section about Harry's heroes, all the people who supported your case." Harry scanned the article with interest, pleased to see that Arabella Figg and Healer Ashworth were being recognized for their courage in testifying. "I'm glad they're getting credit too. It wasn't just me who made this happen." "That's very wise of you to recognize," Augusta said approvingly. "Many important changes require many people working together." Later that week, Master Wardsmith Grimwald arrived to establish the new protective enchantments around Longbottom Manor. The elderly wizard spent 3 days weaving complex spells into the very foundations of the estate, creating barriers that would keep Harry as safe as the blood protection ever had, while allowing him to live freely and happily. "As the wards are keyed to family," Grimwald explained as he completed his work. "As long as Harry considers this his home, and you consider him your family, the protection will hold. It's powered by love rather than sacrifice, a much more sustainable magic." That evening, as they sat in the garden watching Neville tend to his experimental plants, Augusta pulled out a leather-bound photo album she had been working on for days. "I thought you might like to see these," she said, settling between the boys on the garden bench. The album contained photographs spanning generations of the Potter and Longbottom families. Harry gasped as he saw moving pictures of his parents for the first time, James laughing at something off-camera, Lily reading with baby Harry in her lap, both parents together at various family gatherings. "I contacted your parents' old friends," Augusta explained, as Harry traced his father's face with one finger. "They were happy to share their favorite memories and photographs. I wanted you to know the people your parents really were, not just the legends they've become." "They look so young," Harry whispered, studying a picture of his parents at their wedding. "They were young," Augusta said softly, "barely out of Hogwarts when they were killed, but they packed a lifetime of love into those few short years." She turned the page to reveal photographs of Frank and Alice Longbottom, looking brave and determined in their aura robes. "Our boys," she said, including both Harry and Neville in that designation, "come from families of heroes. Not the kind who sought glory, but the kind who stood up for what was right when it mattered most." Neville leaned against his grandmother's shoulder, studying the pictures of the parents he barely remembered. "Do you think they would be proud of us? All of us, I mean." Augusta looked at the 2 boys beside her. Harry, no longer the frightened, undernourished child who had arrived at her door, but a young man beginning to understand his own worth. And Neville, growing more confident and capable each day in the security of a loving home. "I know they would be," she said firmly. "They fought and died for a world where children like you could grow up safe and loved. Seeing you both thriving, supporting each other, choosing kindness despite the pain you've endured. Yes, they would be incredibly proud." That night, as Augusta tucked both boys into their beds, a routine that had evolved naturally over the weeks, she reflected on how much had changed since that rainy evening when Neville had first shared his concerns about his friend, Harry. She had thought she was saving one child from an abusive situation. What she had actually done was create a family, not the family any of them had been born into, but the family they had chosen to become. Harry Potter Longbottom was safe, loved, and home at last. And in the process of saving him, Augusta had rediscovered the joy of motherhood she had thought lost forever when Frank and Alice were taken from her. It was a different kind of victory than she had imagined when she first filed that petition with the Wizengamot. But looking at the 2 boys sleeping peacefully under her protection, Augusta knew it was the most important victory of her life. The future might still hold challenges, Voldemort's followers, Harry's continued healing, the normal trials of raising 2 magical children, but they would face those challenges together. as a family. And that made all the difference. Chapter 8. Facing the Past. The first session with Mind Healer. Lydia Clearwater took place in a cozy office at St. Mungo's, furnished with comfortable chairs and soft lighting that made the space feel more like a sitting room than a medical facility. Harry sat rigidly in his chair, hands clasped tightly in his lap, while Augusta waited in the outer office. At 12 years old, his birthday had passed quietly but joyfully at Longbottom Manor. Harry was finally beginning to understand that the way he had been treated was not normal, not acceptable, and definitely not his fault. "Harry," Healer Clearwater said gently, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of helping damaged children heal. "Can you tell me what it feels like when someone raises their voice around you?" Harry's shoulders tensed automatically. "Like I've done something wrong. Like I need to make myself smaller so they won't notice me as much." He paused, then added with hard-won insight, "Even when I know I haven't done anything wrong. Even when it's not about me at all." "That's called hypervigilance," the healer explained. "Your mind learned to watch for danger constantly, because for so long, danger could come at any time. It was a survival mechanism that kept you safe, but now that you're truly safe, we need to help your mind learn to relax." Over the weeks that followed, Harry's sessions with Healer Clearwater became a cornerstone of his healing. She taught him breathing exercises for when panic threatened to overwhelm him, helped him recognize the difference between rational and irrational fears, and most importantly, began the slow process of convincing him that he deserved love and care simply because he existed. "I used to think," Harry told her during one session in late September, "that if I could just be good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, maybe they would love me. But Mrs. Longbottom, Augusta, she loves me even when I make mistakes. Even when I have nightmares and wake her up. Even when I accidentally broke her favorite vase last week." "And how does that feel?" Healer Clearwater asked. Harry was quiet for a long moment, searching for words to describe something he had never experienced before. "Safe," he said finally, "like I can breathe properly for the first time." At home, Augusta watched Harry's progress with a mixture of pride and protective fury. Pride at his resilience, his willingness to do the hard work of healing, his growing confidence. Fury at the people who had made such healing necessary in the first place. But she kept that fury hidden, focusing instead on creating the stable, loving environment Harry needed to continue growing. "Gran," Neville said one evening, as they sat in the garden, watching Harry practice flying on his new broomstick, a birthday gift that had left him speechless with joy. "Harry's getting better, isn't he? I mean, really better?" Augusta followed Neville's gaze to where Harry was performing gentle loops in the air, his laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. "He is," she confirmed, "but healing isn't a straight line, dear one. There will still be difficult days, setbacks, moments when old fears resurface. The important thing is that he knows he's not facing them alone." Neville nodded thoughtfully. Over the months since Harry's arrival, he had grown more confident himself, taking pride in being able to help his friend navigate the complexities of family life, teaching Harry about Longbottom family traditions, showing him how to care for the magical plants in their greenhouse, simply being a steady, accepting presence. These things had given Neville a sense of purpose and importance he had never felt before. October brought Harry's first Halloween at Longbottom Manor, a day that had always been fraught with pain and significance. But instead of dwelling on the anniversary of his parents' deaths, Augusta arranged a celebration that honored their memory while creating new, positive associations with the date. "Your parents loved Halloween," she told Harry, as they decorated the manor with floating jack-o'-lanterns and autumn leaves that danced through the air. "James used to say it was the perfect holiday for mischief, and Lily always insisted on making the most elaborate costumes. They would want you to enjoy yourself today." They carved pumpkins together, Harry's first time doing so, and Augusta told stories about James's legendary Halloween pranks and Lily's famous pumpkin pasties. When evening came, instead of trick-or-treating, which would have been impossible given Harry's fame, they hosted a small gathering for a few close friends, as including some of Harry's Hogwarts classmates who had stayed in touch over the summer. Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger arrived via flu, both of them marveling at how much better Harry looked. The haunted thinness was gone, replaced by healthy colour and genuine smiles. More importantly, Harry seemed truly happy to see them, engaging in their conversations without the old defensiveness and fear. "You look brilliant, mate," Ron said simply, and Harry beamed at the compliment in a way that made Augusta's heart clench with joy. As autumn progressed into winter, Harry's healing continued to accelerate. The nightmares became less frequent, his startle responses less severe. He began to initiate conversations, express opinions, even disagree with Augusta and Neville without expecting punishment. Most remarkably, but he started to believe in his own worth as something separate from his fame or his usefulness to others. December brought preparations for Harry's first real Christmas, and Augusta threw herself into making it perfect. Not overwhelmingly extravagant, Harry was still learning to accept gifts and celebrations, but warm, loving, and filled with the traditions he had never experienced. "What's a Christmas stocking?" Harry asked one evening, as Augusta brought out boxes of decorations, his honest curiosity about basic holiday traditions breaking her heart anew. "It's a tradition where you hang stockings by the fireplace on Christmas Eve," Neville explained enthusiastically, "and Father Christmas fills them with small gifts and sweets overnight." Harry looked skeptical. "But how does he know what you want? And how does he get into houses with wards?" Augusta and Neville exchanged amused glances. Even magical children sometimes struggled with the logistics of Father Christmas's operations. "Magic," Augusta said with a mysterious smile. "Very old, very powerful Christmas magic that works differently from regular spells." They spent days preparing for the holiday. Harry helped Augusta bake traditional Christmas biscuits, his face bright with concentration as he carefully decorated each one. He and Neville selected gifts for each other, a process that involved much whispering and secretive trips to Diagon Alley. Augusta watched these normal childhood activities with deep satisfaction, seeing in Harry's joy the successful erasure of years of holiday neglect. On December 20th, Augusta made an announcement that surprised both boys. "Well, I thought it might be time to visit your parents, Harry, if you feel ready for it." Harry's expression grew solemn. "Their graves, you mean?" "Yes. Godric's Hollow, where they're buried. It's not far from here. And I thought you might like to tell them about your new home, your new life. Sometimes it helps to share good news with the people we love, even when they can't answer back." The trip to Godric's Hollow took place on a crisp winter morning, the three of them bundling into Augusta's enchanted automobile for the drive to the small wizarding village where Harry's parents lay at rest. The cemetery was peaceful, covered with a light dusting of snow that made everything look clean and new. James and Lily Potter's grave was simple but beautiful, demarked with a white marble headstone that read, "The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death." Fresh flowers lay at its base, lilies and roses that Augusta suspected were maintained by old friends who still remembered and mourned. Harry stood before the grave for a long time, his hands buried deep in his winter coat pockets. Augusta and Neville waited patiently, giving him the space to process whatever emotions were surfacing. "I don't really remember you," Harry said finally, his voice quiet but clear. "But Augusta has pictures, and she tells me stories. She says you loved each other very much, and that you loved me. I think I believe her now." He took a shaky breath, his words coming faster, as if he needed to get them all out before his courage failed. "I'm safe now. I live with Augusta and Neville, and they love me too. Not because I'm famous or because I defeated Voldemort, but just because I'm me. I didn't know that was possible, but it is." Tears were flowing freely down Harry's cheeks, but his voice remained steady. "I'm sorry it took me so long to visit. I was afraid you might be ashamed of me, or disappointed in how weak I was, how long I let them hurt me. But Augusta says you would be proud of me for surviving, for learning to trust again, for choosing to love people even after everything that happened." Augusta felt her own eyes fill with tears as she watched this brave, wounded boy finally allowing himself to grieve, not just for what he had lost, but for what he had never had. "I miss you," Harry whispered to the stone. "I'll never stop missing you. But I'm okay now. I'm really, truly okay." On the drive home, Harry curled up between Augusta and Neville in the back seat of the car, emotionally drained, but somehow lighter. The visit had been difficult, but it had also been healing in a way that no amount of professional counseling could match. He had finally been able to honor his parents' memory while accepting that his life could still be good, still be full of love and joy. Christmas morning at Longbottom Manor dawned bright and cold, with fresh snow covering the grounds in pristine white. Harry woke to find his stocking full of sweets and small gifts, just as Neville had promised. Under the tree were larger presents, books about magic and history, a beautiful chess set, warm winter clothes, and a photograph album containing pictures of his parents that moved and smiled whenever he looked at them. But the best gift was intangible, the feeling of belonging, of being wanted, of sitting around the breakfast table with people who loved him, while Christmas carols played softly in the background. This was what family felt like. This was what home meant. As they sat by the fire that evening, Augusta reading aloud from A Christmas Carol while the boys played wizard's chess, Harry reflected on how much his life had changed. 6 months ago, he had been a frightened, damaged boy who didn't believe he deserved kindness. Now he was part of a family, healing from his trauma with professional help, learning to trust in love that came without conditions. "Augusta," he said during a quiet moment, his voice soft with gratitude. "Thank you. For everything. For fighting for me when I didn't know how to fight for myself. For giving me a family. For teaching me that I'm worth saving." Augusta set down her book and pulled both boys close to her on the sofa. "Oh, my dear boy," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You didn't need to be saved. You just needed to be loved. And you will be, for as long as I draw breath." Outside, snow continued to fall on the peaceful grounds of Longbottom Manor, where a boy named Harry Potter Longbottom was finally, truly home. The past would always be part of him. The scars, the memories, the hard-won strength that came from surviving terrible things. But the future stretched ahead, bright with possibility, filled with family, love, and the unshakable knowledge that he was worthy of both. Harry Potter. Longbottom was no longer just surviving, he was thriving, and that made all the difference. Chapter 9. Return to Hogwarts. The Hogwarts Express pulled into Hogsmeade Station on a crisp September morning, carrying students eager to begin another year at the legendary school. Among them, in a comfortable compartment near the middle of the train, sat Harry Potter Longbottom, looking remarkably different from the thin, nervous boy who had made this same journey just over a year ago. The months at Longbottom Manor had transformed him completely. Proper nutrition had filled out his frame and added healthy color to his cheeks. The haunted look was gone from his green eyes, replaced by quiet confidence and genuine happiness. Most remarkably, he sat easily with his friends, participating fully in their conversations without the old defensiveness or need to prove himself. "I can't believe how different you look," Hermione said for the 3rd time since boarding the train, studying Harry with the same analytical intensity she usually reserved for particularly challenging textbooks. "I mean, we saw you over the summer, but seeing you here, going back to school, it's like you're a completely different person." Same person, Harry corrected with a smile. Just properly cared for this time. Amazing what regular meals, and people who actually like you can accomplish. Ron nodded emphatically. My mum nearly cried when she saw you at the Burrow last month. Said you finally looked like a proper 12-year-old instead of what you looked like before. The casual reference to his previous condition didn't sting the way it once would have. Harry had learned to speak openly about his experiences, recognizing that silence only perpetuated the shame he was working so hard to overcome. "How's Neville doing?" Hermione asked. "I heard he's staying for an extra year of tutoring before starting Hogwarts." "He's brilliant," Harry said, with genuine pride. Augusta thought he could use another year to build his confidence after everything with his parents. He's been helping me with herbology all summer. Turns out he's absolutely gifted with plants when he's not worried about disappointing anyone. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the corridor outside their compartment. Through the glass, they could see students pressing against the windows, trying to catch a glimpse of Harry. The attention wasn't new, but the nature of it had changed completely since the highly publicized guardianship case. "Harry Potter Longbottom," called a voice from the corridor. "Is it true you're starting a foundation to help other abused magical children?" Harry sighed but smiled as he opened the compartment door. The corridor was packed with students of various ages, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and something that looked like hope. "It's true," Harry said clearly, his voice carrying the kind of confidence that would have been impossible just months before. "Augusta, my guardian, and I are working with the Ministry to establish resources for magical children who are being hurt by their families. Every child deserves to be safe." A small girl who couldn't have been more than 13 raised her hand tentatively. "My cousin. He lives with relatives who aren't very nice to him. Could the foundation help him?" Harry's expression softened as he knelt down to the girl's eye level. "What's your name?" "Susan Bones," she whispered, and Harry's eyes widened slightly with recognition. "Your aunt is Amelia Bones? She helped save my life, you know. She's one of the bravest people I've ever met." Susan's face lit up with pride. "And yes, if your cousin needs help, there are people who will listen now. The Foundation will have trained advocates who know how to help children in dangerous situations." As word spread through the train that Harry was openly discussing his experiences and the new child protection initiatives, more students gathered. Some came out of curiosity, but others approached with the careful hope of children who recognized a kindred spirit. "But is it scary?" asked a quiet Ravenclaw boy. "Standing up to adults who hurt you, I mean." "Terrifying," Harry admitted honestly. "But you know what's scarier? Living your whole life believing you deserve to be hurt. And you know what I learned? We don't deserve it. None of us. And there are adults out there who will fight for us if we give them the chance." By the time the train pulled into Hogwarts Station, Harry had spoken with dozens of students, sharing information about the new advocacy resources and, more importantly, letting them see that survival was possible, that healing was achievable, that they were not alone. The Great Hall that evening buzzed with an energy that had nothing to do with the usual start-of-term excitement. Harry's transformation was obvious to everyone present, but more significantly, his openness about his experiences had created a new atmosphere of honesty and support among the student body. Professor McGonagall, introducing the new first years, seemed particularly pleased to see Harry looking healthy and confident. Professor Snape's expression was unreadable as always, though Harry thought he detected something that might have been approval when their eyes met briefly. But it was Dumbledore's reaction that proved most interesting. When the headmaster rose to address the school, his usual grandfatherly twinkle seemed somewhat forced, and his eyes kept returning to Harry with an expression that mixed regret with genuine warmth. "Welcome back to Hogwarts," Dumbledore began, his voice carrying throughout the hall. "This year brings with it new opportunities for learning, growth, and understanding. or some of our students have faced extraordinary challenges over the summer, and I am pleased to see them returning to us stronger and more confident than ever." His gaze lingered on Harry for a moment, before continuing. "We have also seen important changes in our broader magical community, changes that remind us that the welfare of every magical child is our collective responsibility. Hogwarts has always been a place of safety and learning, but this year we recommit ourselves to ensuring that safety extends beyond these walls." After the feast, as students made their way to their dormitories, Professor McGonagall approached Harry in the corridor. "Mr. Potter Longbottom," she said, her voice carrying warmth he had never heard from her before. "Might I have a word?" They walked to a quiet alcove, where McGonagall studied him with the intensity she usually reserved for particularly complex transfiguration problems. "You look well," she said finally. "Remarkably well. Mrs. Longbottom has clearly provided you with the care you should have had from the beginning." "She has," Harry agreed simply. "She saved my life, Professor. Not in the dramatic way people usually mean when they talk about me, but in all the ways that actually matter." McGonagall nodded slowly. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Potter Longbottom. I had concerns about your placement from the very beginning, but I allowed myself to be overruled by those I trusted to know better. I should have advocated for you more strongly." Professor Dumbledore explained his reasoning to the Wizengamot, Harry said carefully. "He genuinely believed he was protecting me. He was wrong, but he wasn't malicious." "You are remarkably generous in your forgiveness," McGonagall observed. "Many would not be so understanding." Harry considered this. "Augusta taught me that holding on to anger only hurts the person carrying it. I choose to focus on making sure other children don't go through what I did." Over the following weeks, Harry's improved academic performance became the talk of the school. Properly nourished and emotionally secure, he excelled in every subject. His essays were thoughtful and well-researched. His practical work showed genuine understanding rather than desperate guesswork, and his participation in class discussions revealed an intelligence that had been suppressed by years of being told he was worthless. "But it's remarkable," Professor Flitwick commented to his colleagues after a particularly brilliant charms lesson. "The boy's magical signature is entirely different. Stronger, more focused, more confident. It's as if he's finally accessing his true potential. Even Professor Snape, never one to praise Gryffindors unnecessarily, grudgingly admitted that Harry's potions work had improved dramatically." When Harry successfully brewed a perfect pepper-up potion on his first attempt, Snape actually awarded Gryffindor 5 points, shocking the entire class into silence. "Adequate work, Potter Longbottom," Snape said dryly. But Harry caught the hint of approval in his voice. Harry's relationships with his fellow students evolved as well. His friendship with Ron and Hermione deepened as it became based on genuine affection, rather than hero worship or protective instinct. He began reaching out to students he had never noticed before, particularly those who seemed isolated or struggling. "You've started collecting strays," Hermione observed one evening, as Harry helped a homesick first year with her defense against the dark arts essay. "Not strays," Harry corrected gently. "Just people who need someone to notice them. I know what it's like to be invisible, to think no one cares whether you exist or not." The most significant change, however, was in Harry's relationship with authority figures. No longer the cowed, desperate to please boy who had arrived at Hogwarts the previous year, he approached teachers with respectful confidence, but asked questions when he didn't understand something, and even occasionally disagreed with professors when he felt they were wrong. This new dynamic was most apparent in his interactions with Dumbledore. When the headmaster requested a private meeting in mid-October, Harry approached the gargoyle-guarded entrance to the office with calm self-assurance, rather than the anxiety that had once characterized such summons. "Harry," Dumbledore said as he entered the circular office, "please sit down. Lemon drop?" "No, thank you, Professor," Harry replied politely, settling into the chair across from the massive desk. Dumbledore studied him for a long moment, his blue eyes reflecting complex emotions. "You have changed remarkably since last we spoke privately, Mrs. Longbottom has clearly provided you with excellent care." "She has," Harry agreed. "Was there something specific you wanted to discuss, sir?" The directness of the question caught Dumbledore slightly off guard. The old Harry would have sat silently, waiting to be told why he had been summoned. "I wanted to discuss your advocacy work," Dumbledore said finally. "The foundation you and Mrs. Longbottom are establishing. It's admirable work, but I worry about the additional pressure it places on you." Harry tilted his head thoughtfully. "With respect, Professor, I think that's my decision to make, isn't it? Augusta supports my choices, as long as they don't interfere with my education or well-being." "Indeed," Dumbledore said softly. "You are quite right, of course. I worry about you taking on the world's burdens at such a young age." "I'm not trying to take on the world's burdens," Harry replied with the kind of clarity that came from months of therapy and unconditional family support. "I'm trying to use my experiences to help other children who are suffering the way I suffered. That's not a burden. It's a purpose." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but the fundamental dynamic had shifted permanently. Dumbledore could no longer simply direct Harry's life or make decisions for him. Harry was a young man with his own agency, his own support system, and his own moral compass. As Halloween approached, now a day Harry associated with celebration and family rather than loss and trauma, he received an owl from Augusta that made him smile broadly. "My dear Harry," the letter read, "what Neville and I are so proud of the reports we've received from your professors. You are thriving in ways that bring joy to my heart. The Foundation has received its first major donation from an anonymous source who was inspired by your courage in speaking publicly about your experiences. We are now able to hire our first full-time advocate. Your strength is already helping other children find their way to safety. With all my love, Augusta." That evening, as Harry sat in the Gryffindor common room working on a transfiguration essay, while Ron and Hermione debated the proper preparation of moonstone powder, he reflected on how completely his life had changed. A year ago, he had been a frightened, damaged boy who believed he deserved whatever cruelty was inflicted upon him. Now he was a confident young man with a loving family, genuine friends, and a purpose that extended beyond his own healing. The scar on his forehead, the physical reminder of his survival and fame, had not disappeared. It never would. But it no longer defined him. He was Harry Potter Longbottom, survivor, advocate, beloved son and brother, brilliant student, and most importantly, a young man who knew beyond any doubt that he was worthy of love. And that knowledge changed everything. As he looked around the common room at his friends and fellow students, many of whom had approached him over the past weeks to share their own struggles or seek advice, Harry felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had not simply survived his ordeal, he had transformed it into something that could help others. The boy who lived had become the boy who thrived, and in thriving, what he was teaching others that they could thrive too. That was a legacy worth building. Chapter 10. Growing Stronger. The attack came on a cold February evening, just as the Longbottom family was settling in for a quiet dinner during the midwinter break from Hogwarts. Harry and Neville had spent the day working in the greenhouse, tending to some particularly temperamental, venomous tentacular seedlings, while Augusta reviewed correspondence from the newly established Children's Advocacy Foundation. The peaceful domestic scene was shattered by the sudden flaring of the perimeter wards, their magical alarms shrieking through the manor like banshees. Augusta was on her feet before the echoes faded, her wand appearing in her hand with the fluid grace of someone who had never forgotten her wartime training. "Boys," she said sharply, her voice carrying the authority of a general. "Upstairs. Now. Emergency protocols, just as we practiced." But even as Harry and Neville moved toward the stairs, the front windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and twisted metal. Dark figures poured through the breach, their faces hidden behind the skull-like masks that Harry recognized with a chill of terror. Death Eaters. "Well, well," drawled a cold voice from behind one of the masks. "The famous Harry Potter, living in luxury while his betters rot in Azkaban. Did you really think your blood-traitor protectors could keep you safe forever?" Augusta stepped protectively in front of both boys, her wand steady, despite facing at least 6 masked attackers. "You are not welcome in my home," she said, with deadly calm. "Leave now, or face the consequences." The Death Eaters laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Consequences? From one old woman and 2 children? I think not. What happened next would be talked about in aura training circles for years to come. Augusta Longbottom, grandmother and advocate for children's rights, transformed into something magnificent and terrible, a witch at the height of her considerable powers, fighting to protect her family. Her first spell, a modified blasting curse, sent 3 Death Eaters flying backward through the ruined windows. Her second, a complex shielding charm, deflected a barrage of dark curses that would have leveled half the parlor. Her third was something Harry had never seen before, a golden web of magic that seemed to bind the very air around their attackers, making their movements sluggish and their spells weak. "Impressive. Oh, for a blood traitor," snarled one of the remaining Death Eaters, raising his wand toward Harry. "But you cannot protect them forever." That was when Neville surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of cowering or fleeing, he stepped up beside his grandmother, his own wand trembling but determined. "He's not just my friend," Neville said, his voice shaking but resolute. "He's my brother, and nobody hurts my brother." The stunning spell that erupted from Neville's wand was powered by months of confidence building, family love, and the fierce determination to protect someone he cared about. It caught the Death Eater completely off guard, dropping him to the marble floor like a felled tree. Harry, meanwhile, had not been idle. The lessons Augusta had been giving both boys in defensive magic suddenly proved their worth as he cast a perfect protean shield, protecting Neville's flank from a vicious cutting curse. The 3 of them, grandmother, adopted son and grandson, formed a defensive triangle in the center of the ruined parlor, their magic working in harmony in ways that made the very walls of Longbottom Manor seem to hum with protective power. "Enough of this!" roared the apparent leader of the Death Eaters, his mask falling away to reveal the sneering face of Antonin Dolohov. "Kill them all. The Dark Lord's orders were clear. Make an example of anyone who defies the natural order." But as Dolohov raised his wand to cast what was clearly intended to be an unforgivable curse, the air itself seemed to revolt against him. Of Master Wardsmith Grimwald's protections, powered by the genuine love this family shared, flared to brilliant life. Golden light erupted from every surface of the manor, wrapping around the Death Eaters like chains forged from the very concept of home and safety. The attackers found themselves unable to apparate, unable to cast their darkest spells, unable to do anything but fight a defensive battle against magic they didn't understand, the magic of a family protecting itself. Augusta pressed their advantage ruthlessly, her spells coming faster and more precisely than Harry had ever seen from any witch or wizard, including his professors at Hogwarts. She fought with the skill of someone who had learned her craft during the height of Voldemort's power, when hesitation meant death, and mercy was a luxury no one could afford. "Or you made a critical error," she told Dolohov, as her binding curse wrapped around him like serpents of pure magic. "You attacked my children in their own home. There is no magic more powerful than a parent protecting their young." Within 10 minutes, it was over. 6 Death Eaters lay unconscious or bound on the floor of the parlor, their masks removed to reveal faces that would soon grace the front pages of every magical newspaper in Britain. The manor's emergency wards had already summoned the Auras, who arrived to find Augusta calmly serving tea to two shaken but triumphant boys while their prisoners awaited collection. "Mrs. Longbottom," said Aura Kingsley Shacklebolt, as he surveyed the scene with obvious admiration, "this is quite possibly the most thorough defeat of a Death Eater cell I've ever witnessed. Are any of you injured?" "Nothing that won't heal," Augusta replied briskly, though Harry noticed her hands were trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "They were foolish enough to attack us in our own home, where the protections are strongest, and we fight for something they can never understand." Harry looked around at the damaged parlor. Broken windows, scorched walls, furniture reduced to splinters, and felt an unexpected surge of pride. They had defended their home, together, as a family. "I can't believe we actually fought them off," Neville said wonderingly, staring at his wand as if seeing it for the first time. "I mean, really fought them. Not just hid or ran away, but actually fought." "You were magnificent," Harry told his brother sincerely. "Both of you. I've never seen magic like that, Augusta." "Well, where did you learn to fight like that?" Augusta's expression grew somber. "During the First War, Harry, when Frank and Alice were auras and the world seemed to be ending around us. I learned that sometimes the most important magic is the magic you use to protect the people you love." The investigation that followed revealed the attack had been planned for weeks. Dolohov and his associates, recently escaped from a ministry transport, had targeted Harry specifically, hoping to strike a blow against the blood traitor sympathizers who had stolen him from his proper guardians. Their intelligence had been woefully inadequate. They had expected to find a pampered celebrity and his weak protectors, not a family of fighters prepared to defend their home with their lives. While the irony, Auror Shacklebolt told them as the prisoners were led away, is that they've actually made your case stronger. The public response to this attack has been overwhelming. Hundreds of letters of support, offers of additional protection, and substantial donations to your advocacy foundation. They intended to frighten other families away from helping magical children in need. Instead, they've inspired a movement. Indeed, the Daily Prophet's coverage of the attack was front-page news for a week. Rita Skeeter's articles, for once restrained and factual, painted a picture of a family under siege for the crime of caring for an abused child. The photographs of the damaged parlor, with Augusta's calm statement that they would rebuild and continue their work, inspired editorials and opinion pieces throughout the magical world. But more importantly, the attack had revealed something crucial about the bonds that had formed at Longbottom Manor. Under pressure, facing genuine danger, the three of them had fought not as separate individuals, but as a true family unit. Harry and Neville had protected each other with the fierce loyalty of brothers, while Augusta had defended them both with the implacable determination of a mother whose children were threatened. In the days that followed, as repairs were made to the manor and additional security measures were implemented, the family found themselves closer than ever. The shared experience of danger and triumph had forged something unbreakable between them. "I used to have nightmares about Death Eaters," Harry confided to Augusta one evening as they sat in the newly restored parlor. "Yes, about being helpless while people I cared about were hurt. But during the attack, all I could think about was protecting Neville, helping you, making sure our family stayed safe." "That's because you've learned something very important," Augusta replied, her voice warm with pride. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of fear when something important is at stake." Neville, who had been unusually quiet since the attack, finally spoke up. "I always thought I was weak," he said softly. "My whole life, everyone told me I was disappointing, that I wasn't living up to my parents' legacy. But when those Death Eaters threatened Harry, threatened you, Gran, I felt strong. Really strong, for the first time in my life." Augusta pulled both boys close to her on the sofa, or her arms encompassing them with the fierce protectiveness that had made her legendary among Death Eaters unfortunate enough to face her in combat. "You are both stronger than you know," she said firmly. "But more than that, you're stronger together than you could ever be apart. That's what family means. Not just sharing a name or a home, but knowing that you'll fight for each other no matter what. The attack also brought unexpected support from throughout the magical community. Families who had been helped by the Advocacy Foundation sent protective charms and ward stones. Hogwarts professors offered their services for additional security consultations. Even former adversaries reached out with offers of assistance. Professor Snape, of all people, appeared at their door 3 days after the attack, to carrying a collection of protective potions that would make even the most determined assassin think twice about approaching the manor. "These are for the boys," he told Augusta curtly, though his black eyes lingered on Harry with something that might have been approval. They performed adequately during the attack. It would be unfortunate if their progress were interrupted by further Death Eater stupidity. Most significantly, the attack had proven that the new protective wards worked exactly as intended. The love-based magic that Master Grimwald had woven into the very foundations of the manor had not only repelled the attackers, but had actively enhanced the family's ability to defend themselves. Their magic had been stronger, their spells more precise, their teamwork more seamless, because they were fighting in a place where they truly belonged. "It's remarkable," Master Grimwald observed when he came to inspect his work after the attack. "The wards didn't just hold, they evolved. They responded to the love between you and amplified it into something I've never seen before. This is what protection should be. Not chains that bind, but wings that lift." As February gave way to March and the manor settled back into its peaceful routine, Harry reflected on how much had changed since that first attack. A year ago, facing Death Eaters would have left him traumatized and helpless. Now, while the experience had been frightening, it had also been empowering. He had fought alongside his family and emerged victorious. The boy who had once cowered in a cupboard, convinced he deserved whatever cruelty was inflicted upon him, had stood his ground against the most dangerous dark wizards in Britain and helped drive them back. The transformation was complete, not just in his living situation or his emotional healing, but in his fundamental understanding of his own worth and capabilities. "We should probably expect more attacks," Augusta said pragmatically, as they reviewed additional security measures over breakfast one morning. "Our work threatens people who profit from the suffering of children, and desperate people do desperate things." "Let them come," Harry said with calm confidence. "We'll be ready." Neville nodded in agreement, his posture straight and his expression determined. "We've got each other. We've got this house. We've got magic that's stronger because we use it for love instead of hate. What more do we need?" Augusta smiled at her boys, both of them transformed by love and challenged by adversity into young men of remarkable courage and character. "Nothing more at all," she agreed. "Nothing more at all." The attack on Longbottom Manor would be remembered as a turning point in the struggle for magical children's rights. But within the family itself, it would be remembered as the moment they truly became unbreakable. Not because they were invulnerable, but because they had proven they would face any danger together. They were no longer just a family in name. They were a family forged in the fire of genuine love, tested by genuine danger, and strengthened by genuine triumph. And that made them powerful in ways their enemies could never understand or defeat. Chapter 11. The Ripple Effects. The Wizengamot chambers were packed to capacity on the morning of March 15th, 1993, as Harry Potter Longbottom prepared to address the assembly for the second time in less than a year. But this time, he wasn't a frightened victim seeking protection. He was a confident young advocate speaking on behalf of magical children throughout Britain who still lived in fear and silence. Augusta sat in the gallery beside Neville, both of them beaming with pride as Harry took his place at the speaker's podium. At 13, he carried himself with a poise that belied his youth, his voice clear and steady as he addressed the most powerful witches and wizards in the country. "Members of the Wizengamot," Harry began, his green eyes scanning the assembled faces with calm confidence. "Nearly a year ago, you made a decision that saved my life. Today, I ask you to make decisions that could save hundreds of other lives." He paused, letting his words settle over the hushed chamber before continuing. "Since my case became public knowledge, the Children's Advocacy Foundation has received over 300 letters from magical children describing abuse, neglect, and mistreatment in their homes. 300 children who read about my rescue and found the courage to ask for help." A murmur rippled through the assembly. 300 cases was far more than anyone had anticipated. These children wrote to us because they saw that change was possible, that adults in authority would listen, that the wizarding world finally cared about their welfare. But caring isn't enough if we don't have the legal framework to act. Harry's testimony was followed by a parade of experts, advocates, and most powerfully, other survivors. 12-year-old Susan Bones spoke about her cousin's situation with relatives who used magic to silence him whenever he tried to speak. A shy Hufflepuff girl testified about a family friend whose parents locked her in warded rooms for days as punishment. A young Ravenclaw boy described watching his squib sister be systematically tortured by pure-blood parents who considered her an embarrassment to their lineage. Each testimony was more heartbreaking than the last, but each also carried a message of hope. These children had found the courage to speak because Harry had shown them it was possible to survive, to heal, to build better lives. Minister Fudge, who had initially been reluctant to tackle such a politically sensitive issue, found himself moved by the testimonies. "The scope of this problem," he said during a recess, "is far greater than any of us imagined. We cannot, in good conscience, ignore such systematic suffering." The proposed legislation, formally titled the Magical Children's Welfare Protection Act, was comprehensive and revolutionary. It established mandatory reporting requirements for magical healers, teachers, and ministry officials who suspected child abuse. It created specialized family courts with judges trained to understand the unique aspects of magical family dynamics. Most importantly, it established that no magical protection, no matter how ancient or powerful, could justify the systematic abuse of a child. The old ways of thinking about family honor, to blood purity and parental authority, must give way to a simple principle, announced Chief Warlock Tiberius Ogden, who had replaced Dumbledore in the position after the latter's voluntary resignation following Harry's case. The welfare of magical children comes first, always. The legislation passed by an overwhelming majority, 47 votes in favor, 3 against, with 2 abstentions. The 3 opposing votes came from old pure-blood families who argued that the new laws infringed on traditional family autonomy, but their arguments carried little weight in the face of the devastating testimonies they had heard. In a surprise announcement following the vote, Minister Fudge revealed that Augusta Longbottom had been asked to head the newly created Department of Child Welfare within the Ministry of Magic. Mrs. Longbottom has demonstrated not only the courage to rescue a child in danger, but the wisdom to help that child heal and thrive, Fudge said, as Augusta rose to acknowledge the applause. There is no one better qualified to ensure that the spirit of this new legislation is properly implemented. Augusta's acceptance speech was brief but powerful. Too many magical children have suffered in silence for too long, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. This department will be their voice, their shield, and their advocate. We will not rest until every magical child in Britain knows they are valued, protected, and loved. The formal severing of Harry's relationship with the Dursleys was handled as a separate legal matter, but one that carried symbolic importance. Lord Vernon and Petunia Dursley were required to appear before a ministry tribunal to formally relinquish any claim to Harry's person, property, or future. The Dursleys arrived at the ministry looking uncomfortable and out of place among the magical surroundings, Vernon's face purple with indignation at being forced to travel by magical means. They sat stiffly through the proceedings, occasionally shooting venomous looks at Harry, who watched them with detached calm. "Do you, Vernon Dursley, formally renounce any legal claim to the person or property of Harry James Potter Longbottom?" asked the tribunal judge. "Yes," Vernon said through gritted teeth. "We never wanted the freak anyway. Should have left him on the doorstep where we found him." The casual cruelty of the statement caused several ministry officials to gasp audibly. Harry, however, felt only a distant pity for people so consumed by hatred that they couldn't see the love and joy they had rejected. "And do you, Petunia Dursley, sister to the late Lily Potter, renounce any familial claim to her son?" Petunia's answer was quieter, but no less final. "Yes. He was never really family to us." With those words, Harry's last legal connection to his abusive past was severed forever. The blood protection that had originally required him to live with the Dursleys was formally transferred to his new family bonds with the Longbottoms, ensuring his continued magical protection while freeing him from any obligation to his former guardians. As the Dursleys were escorted from the ministry, Vernon turned back for one final sneer. "You'll regret this, boy. And mark my words, you'll come crawling back when reality hits you." Harry looked at his former uncle with something approaching compassion. "No, Uncle Vernon," he said quietly. "I've found my reality, and it's better than anything you could imagine." The impact of the new legislation was immediate and dramatic. Within weeks of its passage, the Department of Child Welfare received over 100 formal complaints about magical children living in dangerous situations. Teams of specially trained investigators were dispatched to homes throughout magical Britain, armed with new legal authority to remove children from harmful environments. Some cases were resolved through family counseling and support services. Others required more drastic intervention. By the end of April, the 17 magical children had been removed from abusive homes and placed with carefully vetted foster families or specialized care facilities. "Each rescue feels like a personal victory," Augusta told Harry during one of their evening conversations. "Every child we save is a reminder of why your courage in speaking out was so important." But perhaps the most significant moment came in late May, when Albus Dumbledore requested a meeting with the Wizengamot to make a formal public statement about Harry's case and his own role in the flawed placement decision. The former Chief Warlock appeared before the assembly, looking every one of his considerable years. His usual aura of benevolent authority was replaced by genuine humility as he addressed the packed chamber. "I come before you today, not as a former leader or celebrated wizard, but as a man who made grievous errors in judgment," Dumbledore began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed chamber. "My decisions regarding Harry Potter's placement were guided by fear rather than wisdom, by abstract theories rather than basic human compassion." The admission sent shocked whispers through the assembly. Albus Dumbledore, the man who had defeated Grindelwald and stood against Voldemort, was publicly acknowledging a fundamental failure of leadership. "I convinced myself that magical protection was more important than emotional welfare, that temporary suffering was acceptable if it served a greater purpose," Dumbledore continued. "I was catastrophically wrong. No child should be sacrificed for any cause, no matter how noble it may seem." His eyes found Harry in the gallery, and for a moment, the two regarded each other across the chamber, the legendary wizard and the boy whose courage had forced him to confront his own fallibility. "Harry Potter Longbottom showed us all what true courage looks like," Dumbledore said. "Not the courage to face dark wizards or impossible odds, but the courage to trust, to heal, and to use one's own pain to prevent the suffering of others. He is a better man at 13 than I was at 113. The statement made front-page headlines in every magical newspaper in Britain. "Dumbledore admits grave error," read the Daily Prophet's banner, while Witch Weekly's editorial praised the former Chief Warlock's unprecedented display of moral courage in acknowledging his mistakes. For Harry, The public vindication was less important than the private healing it represented. But the man whose decisions had trapped him in an abusive situation for 11 years had finally acknowledged the harm those decisions had caused. "How do you feel about it?" Neville asked that evening, as they sat in their garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Peaceful," Harry said, after considering the question carefully. "I don't need his apology to know that what happened to me was wrong, but I'm glad he finally understands it too." As the school year drew to a close, Harry found himself reflecting on the extraordinary changes that had occurred since Augusta first filed her petition with the Wizengamot. What had begun as one woman's determination to save a single abused child had transformed into a movement that was reshaping how magical Britain thought about children's rights and family obligations. The Children's Advocacy Foundation had grown from a small operation run out of Augusta's study into a fully staffed organization with offices in Diagon Alley and satellite locations throughout magical Britain. They provided legal advocacy, counseling services, emergency placement assistance, and most importantly, hope for children who had never imagined that escape from their situations was possible. "You realize what you've accomplished, don't you?" Hermione said, as they packed their belongings for the summer holiday. "You've literally changed the law for every magical child in Britain. That's incredible. Or Harry." "We've changed the law," Harry corrected gently. "None of this would have been possible without Augusta fighting for me, or Neville supporting me, or friends like you and Ron believing in me. It was never just about me." But even as Harry embraced his role as an advocate and reformer, Augusta was careful to ensure he still experienced the normal joys and challenges of adolescence. He attended Quidditch matches, worried about upcoming exams, gossiped with friends about their crushes, and occasionally got into trouble for staying up too late reading in the dormitory. "Being an advocate is part of who you are now," Augusta told him during one of their regular conversations. "But it's not all of who you are. You're also a teenage boy who deserves to enjoy his youth, make mistakes, have adventures, and discover who you want to become." This balance between public advocacy and private growth would become one of the defining characteristics of Harry's adolescence. He never forgot the responsibility that came with his platform, but he also never forgot that he was first and foremost a young man trying to figure out his place in the world. As the Hogwarts Express pulled away from the platform at the end of second year, carrying Harry back to Longbottom Manor for what promised to be a wonderful summer, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. 18 months ago, he had been a frightened, damaged boy who believed he deserved whatever cruelty was inflicted upon him. Now he was a confident young man with a loving family, genuine friends, and a purpose that extended far beyond his own healing. What he had learned that surviving trauma wasn't enough. True healing came from using that survival to create a better world for others facing similar struggles. The ripple effects of Augusta's decision to fight for one abused child were still spreading throughout magical Britain, creating waves of change that would protect countless other children for generations to come. Laws had been rewritten, institutions had been reformed, and an entire society had been forced to confront its failures in protecting its most vulnerable members. But perhaps the most important change was the simplest. Harry Potter Longbottom knew with absolute certainty that he was loved, valued, and home, and that knowledge was changing the world, one child at a time. Chapter 12. A True Family. June 1997. The grounds of Hogwarts had never looked more beautiful than they did on graduation day, with June sunshine streaming through ancient trees and the lake sparkling like diamonds in the distance. In the packed amphitheatre that had been erected for the ceremony, Augusta Longbottom sat in the place of honour reserved for families, her eyes bright with tears of pride as she watched Harry Potter Longbottom accept his diploma as head boy of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Beside her, Neville, now a confident young man of 17, who bore little resemblance to the frightened boy who had once cowered from his grandmother's disappointment. cheered enthusiastically as his brother's name was called. The transformation in both boys over the past 5 years had been nothing short of miraculous, but it was the transformation in their family as a whole that truly took Augusta's breath away. "Harry James Potter Longbottom," Professor McGonagall announced, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd, "graduated with highest honours, recipient of the Order of Merlin 3rd Class for his advocacy work with magical children, and our youngest ever head boy. His career will begin this autumn as a junior advocate with the newly established International Magical Children's Welfare Commission." As Harry stepped forward to receive his diploma, Augusta's mind drifted back to that rainy evening 5 years ago when Neville had first shared his concerns about his friend's treatment at home. She could never have imagined then that her decision to fight for one abused child would lead to such profound changes, not just for Harry, but for their entire family and the wizarding world itself. The boy walking across that stage bore no resemblance to the frightened, malnourished child she had rescued from Privet Drive. Harry had grown tall and strong, his green eyes bright with confidence and purpose. More importantly, he carried himself with the quiet assurance of someone who knew beyond any doubt that he was loved, valued, and home. After the ceremony, as families gathered on the grounds for celebration and farewells, Augusta found herself surrounded by well-wishers and admirers. Her work as head of the Department of Child Welfare had made her one of the most respected figures in magical Britain, but it was her role as Harry's mother, for that was what she had become, in every way that mattered, that brought her the greatest pride. "Mrs. or Longbottom," said a familiar voice, and Augusta turned to see Hermione Granger approaching with her parents. "I wanted to thank you, before we all scatter to the winds. Harry has been the most wonderful friend. But more than that, he's been an inspiration to all of us. The way he's used his experiences to help others, that comes from the love and strength you gave him." "The strength was always his," Augusta replied warmly, embracing the brilliant young woman who had become like a daughter to their family. "I simply provided the safe space for it to grow." Ron Weasley bounded over with his characteristic enthusiasm, followed more sedately by his parents. "Mrs. Longbottom, did you see Harry's speech at the leaving feast? Had half the 7th years in tears when he talked about never giving up on children who think they're not worth saving." "I heard about it," Augusta said with a smile, though I suspect he learned that lesson as much from teaching it to others as from his own experiences. As the afternoon progressed and families began to disperse, Augusta, Harry, and Neville found themselves walking slowly around the lake, treasuring these last moments at the school that had been such a crucial part of their family's story. Harry was quiet, his expression thoughtful, as he gazed across the water toward the castle where he had spent some of the happiest years of his life. "Nervous about starting at the commission?" Neville asked, settling onto a fallen log and pulling his graduation robes around him against the evening breeze. "Excited?" "Mostly," Harry replied, joining his brother on the log while Augusta stood behind them, her hands resting protectively on their shoulders. 5 years ago, I couldn't imagine having any kind of future at all. Now I'm about to start work, helping children all over the world find their way to safety. It feels like everything has led to this moment." "It has," Augusta said softly. "Every choice, every challenge, every moment of growth has prepared you for this work. Your own healing, the legal battles, learning to trust and be trusted, all of it has given you the tools you'll need to help other children." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun begin to set over the lake, each lost in their own reflections about the journey that had brought them to this point. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't fought for me?" Harry asked eventually, his voice curious rather than mournful. "If I had just stayed where I was?" Augusta's jaw tightened at the thought. "You wouldn't have survived," she said bluntly. "Not really. Your body might have endured, but your spirit would have been broken beyond repair, and the wizarding world would have been poorer for the loss of the man you've become. But it's more than that, isn't it?" Neville added thoughtfully. If Harry had stayed with the Dursleys, none of the reforms would have happened. Hundreds of other children would still be trapped in dangerous situations. The Department of Child Welfare wouldn't exist. The laws wouldn't have changed. And our family wouldn't exist, Harry said quietly, the words carrying profound weight. Or not the way it does now. Augusta felt tears prick her eyes as she considered the truth of that statement. When she had first filed that petition with the Wizengamot, she had thought she was saving one child. What she had actually done was save 3 people, Harry from his abuse, Neville from his crushing insecurity, and herself from the isolated grief that had consumed her since Frank and Alice's tragedy. "You saved us all," she told both boys, her voice thick with emotion. "Harry, your courage in trusting us, in healing, in speaking out, it gave Neville the confidence to become the remarkable young man he is today. And it gave me a purpose beyond my own pain, a family to love again." 10 years later, June 2007. The garden party at Longbottom Manor was in full swing, there with children's laughter echoing across the grounds as 3 generations of family and friends gathered to celebrate Harry's engagement to Ginny Weasley. At 27, Harry had become one of the most influential advocates for children's rights in the international magical community, his work taking him all over the world, but always bringing him home to the family that had given him roots. Augusta, now in her 70s, but still formidable, sat in her favourite garden chair, watching with deep satisfaction as Harry and Ginny moved through their guests, accepting congratulations and sharing their joy. Nearby, Neville, now the most celebrated young herbologist in Britain and engaged to Hannah Abbott, was showing a group of fascinated children how to safely handle baby mandrakes. "You look pleased with yourself," said a familiar voice, and Augusta looked up to see Amelia Bones approaching with a glass of champagne. "I am," Augusta admitted without shame. "Look at them, Amelia. Look at what they've become." Amelia followed her gaze to where Harry was kneeling down to speak with a shy little girl whose parents had recently been helped by the Advocacy Foundation. Even at his own engagement party, he couldn't resist reaching out to a child who needed encouragement. The International Commission's report last month said that child protection laws in 14 countries have been reformed based on the British model, Amelia observed. "Your decision to fight for one child has literally changed the world." "Not my decision alone," Augusta corrected. "It took all of us. Harry's courage, Neville's support, your legal expertise, the Wizengamot's wisdom in seeing past politics to basic human decency. And it's still taking all of us to keep the work going." As if summoned by her words, Harry appeared at Augusta's side, Ginny's hand warm in his as they approached the woman who had saved his life in every way that mattered. "Augusta," he said, using the name he had called her since childhood, though it now carried depths of love and respect that no formal title could convey. "Ginny and I wanted to talk to you about something." "Oh?" Augusta raised an eyebrow with interest. "We want you to be the officiating witness at our wedding," Ginny said warmly. "Not just because of your position at the ministry, but because you're the reason Harry became the man I fell in love with. Without you, none of this would be possible." Augusta felt the familiar tightness in her throat that came whenever she was reminded of the profound impact her decision had made, not just on Harry's life, but on the lives of everyone who loved him. "It would be my honor," she said, rising to embrace them both. "My deepest honor." Later that evening, as the last guests departed and the family settled in the parlor for their traditional end-of-celebration tea, Augusta found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. "Do you remember," she said to Harry and Neville as they sat before the fireplace, "the first Christmas after Harry came home? He asked me if we were really a team." "I remember," Harry said with a smile, "as you said families were the most important team you'd ever be on." "And I was right," Augusta said firmly. "Look at what our team has accomplished. Harry, Your work has protected countless children and inspired reforms across the magical world.